Hello. Glad y'all here. Okay. Anybody that hasn't signed in, be sure and sign in. I think we had a couple that haven't signed in yet, so. Okay, first, I would like to introduce our first speaker, and that is Mike McGee. Mike has been a member of the Harvard Chapter Master Naturalist since 2016, which was also my intern class, so now I know how long I've been here. And also a member of the Pines and Forests Chapter of the Native Plant Society of Texas, or NIPSOT. I had a question from someone asking if you could do both, and yes, the answer is yes. We have a lot of people that are both in NIPSOT and Master Naturalists and Master Gardeners and all kinds of stuff. In 2010, Mike retired from a 37-year career with ConocoPhillips, mainly in project management and business development. His degree is in chemical engineering. Gardening, hiking in natural areas, and photographing nature and learning about the natural world are among his retirement hobbies. He has volunteered with Mercer Gardens since 2011, mainly with the Native Plants Committee. He has completed 4 of the native landscaping courses, the certification courses by NIPSOT, and worked on developing and presenting the level 1 course for the Pines and Prairies chapter. He's written several articles on native plants for his community publication and made several presentations on native plants and landscaping. He and I both present this at the Ellis unit because the guys there, the guys in the horticulture program there, Scott Ball was instrumental in getting a program together so that they could take the Master Naturalist class. They can't be certified because they can't do the volunteer stuff. You know, they can't go anywhere. So anyway, but when they get out, then, and they end up in Lubbock or whatever, if they can pass the background check, then they can become Master Naturalists. And so Mike can do that. So, Mike.
Okay, well, good morning. I am really honored to be able to present to you this morning a subject that's important to me. And this is kind of my thing as a master naturalist, is creating habitat in a home. Feel free to ask questions as we go. You will be asked some questions, and we will have a family feud competition this morning. So the front row is one family, the middle row is another cat family, and the back row is yet another family. Okay, so I won't designate, but you kind of get together amongst yourselves and come up with your best answer. And we also have a virtual family. So when I have a multiple guess, as we used to call it, questionnaire, I'll have you virtually just put it in the chat, and Bobby will get what majority said. So, okay, so that's hopefully you've engaged. I have an objective for today. It's a modest objective, sort of in the Jonathan Swift vein of a modest proposal. So that's kind of satirical. I want to change each and all of you. Okay. Now, what I want to change is that whenever you make a decision about gardening in your home for the rest of your life, you'll think about it differently, and maybe you'll make a different choice than you would have before. So, big objective, can be measured, so I know that I'll meet it. So let me start with, I like this quote by Teddy Roosevelt. He's one of my naturalist heroes. I won't read it to you, but the title of it is actually one of instrumental books by Doug Tallamy. I'm an enthusiast of Doug Tallamy. He is probably the #1 person in the United States that has pushed this whole idea of having native plants in our home gardens and parks. He's very influential. He's written a number of books. Nature's Hope is one. Bringing Nature Home was the first one that I read. It's a fantastic book. So if you're interested in this subject, these are great books. This book on oaks is really good. So, and he's a fantastic, yeah.
Okay, I was just trying to say the last name again.
It's Tallamy, Tallamy, the professor of entomology, but he's a brilliant communicator. And there's a lot of research under him on this subject, and I'll be using some of that. And I'm no Doug Tower, okay? I am not in his league, even close, but I hopefully can bring you some specific information in this area and to inform you about the subject. So Lisa and I have been a tag team on this for some time, where I did the natives, and she does the which natives and why, and it's been expanded to herbs this year. So let me get on to the why. But we are all, I think, very connected to nature. Now, I know I'm speaking to the choir here with all the master naturalists, but you feel that, all right? You feel that connection to nature. We know that it's good for us physically. We know that it's good for us emotionally. And I thought I would start just by playing a couple of bird calls, see if you can identify them. And I'll also say, well, what does that bring up when I hear them? So hopefully this is going to work. So here's number one.
Hawk.
It's a hawk.
Red shoulder.
You're exactly right. The red-shouldered hawk. And Hollywood uses them a lot instead of eagles because they think it sounds more like, to me, freedom. And that's sort of what, when I think about and hear those hawks, think about freedom. I love to photograph nature, and hawks are one of my favorites. So the next one is hard, okay? It's not from here, although one in its genus. Okay, anybody know that? Any guesses? Yes. Okay, for the bonus round, is it Eastern or Western?
Oh, gosh. Eastern.
That's the one that's native to here. It's actually a Western meadowlark.
Oh.
And the reason that I use the Western meadowlark, it's also the state bird of Kansas. I am from Kansas. And whenever my wife and I go back to Kansas, we love to go out there. What we listen for is the Western meadowlark. And what it brings up for me is what I call the peace of the prairie. I think it's just a lovely, lovely call. But in my lifetime, in fact, when I left there for graduation, the number of Western monarch meadowlarks have declined almost 70%. And so that's part of the story. So let me get into the story. So now I'm going to move to this. So I like this picture of Earth. That's scientists are saying it's 4.5 billion years old. It's been evolving since it was first created. I'm sure you've seen all the geological phases that have gone through. But there really is no planet B. This is, practically speaking, this is what we've got to sustain our life. That's absolutely clear. And for the foreseeable future, that's clear. So I'm going to talk a little bit about time, because the story of why natives is about time. So I want to get put in relation time of evolution of the plant world and complex life and man on Earth. So to do that, let's equate my outreached hands from left to right is 4.5 billion years. Okay, so that's the time scale. That's 4.5 billion years. So the question is, when did complex life begin. And those of you virtually, what you're seeing there, I want you to vote on this in a minute as well. That's trilobite. Trilobites, the first complex life, it occurred almost at the same time around the globe. It's like a blossoming of this complex life. It's in the sea. It's not on land. This is just in the sea. So given that scale, where do you think on my anatomy, I guess, it occurred? Time zero here, present here. Now it's going to be by group. Okay, this is now the first family feud question. So you have to pick a point, you know, in my sternum or somewhere else. So I'll give you about a minute to consult amongst yourselves and come up with your answers. Who's ever closest gets a point.
Googling aloud.
Googling. No, I'm trying to do it without Googling. Try to do that without. So you got anything in the chat?
Yeah.
Okay, you ready? When you've got an answer before you. Okay. All right. We got anything? We'll let them go into chat. Anything out remotely?
No, not yet. They're saying that the volume isn't loud enough for them, so
Okay. Let's,
Carolyn knows how to.
should I be closer to something? Is that better?
Oh, that is better. I can tell by the ways.
Okay.
Talk some more. There we go.
This will be a challenge for both me and Lisa. We got to kind of stay in one place.
I think this will work then. Bobby, is that better?
I can come on this side.
Hey,
Is that
guys,
better?
Is that better? Anybody
Hey,
at
those
home?
online.
Anybody at home? Tell me if
in chat.
that's, if the sound is better now.
Where on the body?
Where on the body?
Someone said yes.
Okay. All right. So let's.
That it's better.
Okay. Front row. The answer is.
I don't know.
That's-
Beginning, and this is now. So you're right.
So
forearm.
you say it's kind of in here.
Yeah.
Okay. That's your guess. The middle row.
So for the now,
Right here. Towards now. Back row.
Right wrist.
Right there. So we got here, here, and here. Do we have any virtual guesses?
No, I think they must have not heard the question.
Okay, sorry. Well, next ones will be on the screen. All right, the back row won the point. It's right here, about 500 million years ago. The, okay, all right, I've already got the categories here. So back row's got one. There you go.
Geologic time are you saying?
500 million years ago.
Permian or where?
Permian is, yeah, Cambrian?
Is it
I'm not a geologist, so.
Is the Cambrian?
Yeah, that's the person to look at.
All right.
Geology.
Okay, so, but man, if you take our entire recorded history, or, you know, from, you know, what we found that has been written or painted can be erased by a single scrape of a fingernail file. Okay, so this is complex evolution period, and our entire period gets erased by the single scrape of a fingernail file. So we're Johnny come latelys to the party.
Mike, you try to go back to the chart, because they said it.
The sound is better, so you can pay for that.
Okay.
And did it quit working?
Yeah, quit advancing.
See, sometimes when I mess with stuff, that happens.
Or I can do it over there.
No, very much.
Okay, so
Let's go back.
see if it goes back. Okay,
There,
there, okay,
that's-
back in business. Okay, so this is the plot of population of on Earth of humans from about 12,000 years ago, 10,000 BC to current. And 12,000 years ago, we reached all of the continents except Antarctica. And estimated population is 1 million people. So you can see it's just kind of slowly growing. Time of Christ, 300 million people on Earth. And then that inflection point where it goes up parabolically is the Industrial Revolution. That's when our population growth went into overdrive. We're currently 7.3, 7.4 billion people. In my lifetime, the number of people on Earth has gone up by a factor of 3. Number of people in the United States has gone up by over a factor of 2. Now, there's some good news in the forecast that says we'll level at about 11 billion, and then the number of children, defined as 12 and under, is already peaked. So, you know, we've already got a peak there, and there's all kinds of information about it. But for this topic is big increase, and what is its consequence to this living Earth? So this is a plot that shows percentage of arable land that's been converted to human use, and roughly they estimate globally half the land has been converted to use by humans. Okay, so part of that's pasture land, part of it's cropland, and it's, you see the scales of 0 to 100% use. This looks at just the lower 48 if you put states. So if you, Hawaii is excluded, and Alaska, which is quite different. It's principally wild, but this is lower 48 states. The big 3 areas are forest land, grassland, and cropland. And this grassland is both pasture, which is a single species, and something they term rangeland, which is can be multiple species, and it can include native grasses as well. So it's not 100% been converted, it's rangeland. But another big category is urban land, and that's urban land and rural roads are included in that category. It's about 6%. And then another 6% is in parks or preserves, and that's, you know, all of our national parks, all of our state parks, all of our wilderness areas, all of our national wildlife preserves. So that's basically preserved land. And scientists estimate about 5% is completely undisturbed. So it's as it was prior to time that Europeans came to our continent. So it's basically undisturbed. So, so this 5%, the 6% contrast with something I'll talk about a little bit later, but there's a UN convention on biodiversity, and yes.
In the forest land, does that include national forests?
Yes, and the national forests are, they are logged, but they're managed to be sustainable. So they have kind of multiple mandates to, but they are logged, they sell timber off the national forest. So it's not like it's an old growth forest,
Right.
it's logged.
I just was wondering if you considered timber a crop, that was cropland or if it's forest.
Yeah, national forests are in there, but and they harvest them some, but it. And there's another slide I'll show with kind of split of how a little more detail. But I want to contrast what we've preserved, which is about 6%, with what's called the Aichi targets. These were targets established as part of this UN effort on biodiversity. What should it be to try to save biodiversity? The target is 17%. Some countries have already exceeded their targets. France is one. Many, about 20%, have have met their targets. Canada, our neighbor to the north, has, Norway has, China has, so surprisingly, Venezuela has. So that's the target, to preserve biodiversity. There are 196 countries that have signed basically what came out of the Earth Conference, the Readal Accords. All of the UN countries have signed it. The United States has not. So as politics, we can't talk about politics, but we are not a signature to that, so we have not submitted it. But we do attempt. We do attempt.
If we were going to get the 70%, where would it come out of?
Well, I think one of the areas that that is very underrepresented is arable land, but that's privately held.
Yeah.
So that's a really, that's a complex issue there. So this kind of gives you more detail about land use, and I won't go through that. Basically, this is a similar source, but there are 2 points to be made from here. The biggest single category is for livestock. That's about 40% of our land area is for livestock. So that's both in pasture land for raising livestock and in cropland to be able to grow feed for those livestock. The other big category worth noting is the urban area. Urban area is, and I'll show you some more information about that later. It's a growing category in the United States. Every year we use 1 million acres of land, urban area, and that's the equivalent to Los Angeles, Phoenix, and Houston every year. So that's a very rapidly growing area. Okay, so that's now Texas land use. If you've driven across our great state of Texas, you kind of know that this grassland and a lot of its rangeland is huge, especially go west and wow. So that's the by far the biggest area, which is different than the rest of the US. Croplands next, then forest land. Parks and preserves in the state of Texas is 3.4%. And in this case, I have included land that is in conservancy trust that is designed to preserve the land's natural resources. So, and that's a pretty big number in Texas. That's number 2 behind federal lands. Okay, so this is now bringing it very close to home, and this is my home. As the center of that map, which is 6x4, I live in South Montgomery County, and these are Google Earth images. So that's what it looked like in 2002. It's essentially largely forested area. Spring Creek goes right through there, and from left to right, you can see it better at 2019. It hasn't changed a lot since then, but you can see it's gone from largely forested canopy, and this was logged area, wasn't, it was privately logged area previously, to largely urban area. The Spring Creek preserves are shown along there, so it hasn't been, and then the part of the northwest hasn't been as well. So that's just a very local example of what's happening with our land use. Okay, so I'm going to dwell on this because I think it's an important concept. So that in ecology, there is this law, which I didn't learn about when I was in college. I didn't learn about the last 10 years. But it's law called the species area relationship, which says the number of species that are supported and will have evolved is equal to the land area raised to a power. So this is what's called the logarithmic equation. And it's been known for a couple hundred years. There's lots of research that supports this. And this is one example that shows the log of the number of fish species versus the log of area. So you can look at the continents, big area, you know, between 1,000 and 10,000 species, come down to the larger islands, fewer species in Hawaii, it's got less than 10. So this is a sort of that linear relationship with land area to support the species. So why should this be so? Why does this happen? First of all, I think of it sort of like a bank account. So if you look at your bank, what do you have at the end versus what it's in the beginning? It's what you have at the end is what you start with plus what you deposit minus what you take out and you use. So that's species, same way. It's what you started with versus how many species were created. They call it speciation. And then how many went extinct. Okay, so that's the equivalent. So the larger the land area, so you got bigger area, bigger population over a wider area. So any disturbance like a disease or a severe weather event like a drought or, you know, an ice age, you know, the larger the area, the lower chances you have for extinction, right? So larger areas should have less extinction. On the other hand, this should have greater greater speciation. So you've got more land area with more barriers, okay, that isolate groups. So then as you have mutations that may allow for better selection, they do better, so you get more opportunity for speciation. So both should be greater with more land area. And we have a practical example of this that's very well set up, started with the Panama Canal. So when they built the lake to run the locks, they created this Barrel, Colorado island from what was then a mountaintop, right? And from the beginning, they set it up as a biological research island. You can go on to it, but it's closely controlled. So they wanted to see what happened. And now we've got over 100 years of data. Well, what that data shows is that there were 3 cat species and they've all gone extinct. About 10% of the butterflies have gone extinct. And 50 to 80 of the bird species that were native, that are non-migratory, have gone extinct because smaller land area. So it works. Okay, so this land area species is real and we know what happens. So the US kind of was one of the leaders in conservation efforts. We had the first national park, it started in 1872 with Yellowstone. Number since then, I think we're up to 61 national parks, lots of state parks. So from kind of 1800s, we started with this conservation because we recognized if we left to its own devices, man was going to spoil it. Now, if you read some of the histories of this, you know, Niagara Falls was kind of a disaster, right? And people were upset about, at least the ones that, about the natural beauty, about what happened. And that kind of was the precursor to Yellowstone. We're not going to let that happen here. So then we had the Wilderness Act in 1964. It's a major act, and then the Endangered Species Act in 1973. So the Endangered Species Act, there's just looked it up. It's at 1,600 listed as threatened or endangered species. We've had 59 delisted because they recovered. Some of them were delisted because they found more data that says it shouldn't have been on there in the first place. But you know, a notable success story is the bald eagle, right? It's not even listed anymore. Had a lot to do with outlawing DDT, but also the Endangered Species Act was instrumental in that and other species being delisted. We've had 31 extinctions. Those are not official. There are 21 that were just nominated, included the ivory-billed woodpecker. But okay, so I'm counting that hasn't gone through the whole process. But so 31 extinctions since then. But some of them were last cited prior to the Endangered Species Act. So you know, it shouldn't really count against it. Another I think, big deal is that in 1980, the Congress made permanent this IRS conservation easement tax deduction. And a lot of these conservancies that are created to protect the land are under this, ruling by the IRS. It's now permanent where you have that easement. And a lot of people in our chapter are in Bioland Conservancy. So it's one of, and they are active here and all along Spring Creek Greenway. So that's really a good thing, this whole conservancy effort. So we started, so the US used this reservation strategy that's also called sparing. All right, so you just spare them by putting them in their reservation land. So the problem with it is it's insufficient area. So I showed you kind of versus least with those IHE targets, and there's a lot of science behind those targets. Won't go into it, but there were literally hundreds of scientists, tens of thousands of papers all went into trying to figure out what they ought to be. Anyway, so it's insufficient area is one, and our arable land is very much underrepresented, and it's fragmented. So if you get these little fragments, if you have the more fragmented they are, the less genetic diversity you have. So now you're more susceptible to disease. And also the more fragmented the populations are, the more susceptible you are to local extinction, right? That little area. So you have a big climate event, then you basically wipe out all of them. So that's a problem. And then if you look forward, there is what is considered a big species debt. They say that we've got a lot of dead species walking, right? So we've reduced all the area, but not all the chickens have come home to roost. The consequences of that hasn't happened yet. And so they've done a lot of forecasting of what's going on. There's a lot in the literature about this. And some of the outcomes are that the best forecast is that there's about 1 million species that are threatened with extinction by the end of the century, and about 500,000 land species that don't have enough land to support them. So the forecaster with this reservation approach we have is not positive. And not only is this loss of species an issue, is that we're just numbers of them are declining. This is a study that was done by the World Wildlife Fund. It's published in, I think, 2019, and they looked at 4,400 invertebrate species they had data on. So they go back to 1970. The Christmas bird count was one of those. There's lots of people in our chapter that are, they run locally the Christmas bird count. A lot of people participate in it, but that was part of the data that goes into being able to track this type of thing. Some of the citizen science. So that the global impact from 1970 to 2016 is a 68% decline in number of wildlife. And okay, so now this is a new multiple guess. If you've been listening, you should get this one. But which of these, this is North America, and I list the threats. There's a land use change is A, B is over exploitation. You can read it, I don't need to read it to you. Climate change is also in there. So which of those you think is the biggest reason? Okay, I'll let you mull this over for a minute and come up with your answers. And put them in the chat.
Who says he wants beer?
Oh, yeah, we got the chat.
Okay, all right.
That's been good.
All right, so everybody's still awake, yeah. Is everybody in, all in? What do you say, front row?
We said, some said land use change and some said representation.
So you gotta come up with one answer, so work on it more. Middle, you're A. Okay,
The chat all over today.
okay, yeah, straight A's, okay. So they're actually listed in their order, right? So 52% is from land use change. This is North America. Climate change is only 5%. That's up to 2016. We're sort of early days in that, but this is what that study showed is the causes in North America of our wildlife population reduction. Another study, well, I got a lot of depressing statistics. So I got to get off this, guys. It'll get better. It'll get better. There's something we can do. That's what Tommy is really good about. There's something that each and every one of us can do about this, and it works. It absolutely works. So now that you're in the pit, we can get out of this. All right, we can get out of this. 3 billion birds a decline. This is North American study in North America 2019, and it lists them by what they call biomes. Grasslands are a biome. Arctic forest generalists, they had generalists different than specialists, so they had different biomes. So the biggest is in grassland. Given how we've used the land, it's kind of follows that should be the biggest. Is about 53%. That comes back to this western meadowlark issue that I talked about earlier. But there's one notable exception. That's wetlands. Wetlands went up 13% since 1970, which is a great story there. Okay, and it's a public-private partnership. Literally billions of dollars have been spent in preserving wetlands and inland game preserves. They also have something they call adaptive game management, which is don't shoot too many of them if their numbers are down. I think that's roughly what it means. And one private group is, yeah, question.
Does any of that come from the rising oceans?
Good question. I think there is a habitat issue there. Okay. But this is net of everything that's happened.
Yeah, this
So
since 1970.
Yeah. Well, this is 2000. This went to 2016. There was not much land loss to ocean, rising oceans as of 2016. There was some, but I don't think it was a major factor. But it's net of all things, right, over that period. But the wetlands, the group I want to mention here is Ducks Unlimited. Great conservation effort. They have preserved over 13 million acres of habitat since 1937. Completely volunteer organization, raised lots of money. They're hunters. Oftentimes the best conservationists are hunters. Teddy Roosevelt, my hero.
So based on that land or the wetlands, have we seen the duck population go up?
Yes. Well, and I refer you to this report. It doesn't actually show very well, but they, yeah, because all of my references I put on the slides.
I guess my point being is that, okay, if we've done such a good job with wetlands, that bird habitat, that's duck habitat.
Yeah, this is wetland biome bird population gone up. So that's ducks and geese and have gone up 13%. Okay. So it's all a lot from habitat restoration.
Perfect.
Huge effort.
I didn't know how to do that.
So I think, I read this report, but I think you can, they do break it down smaller than, just all birds in that biome. They'll break it down to,
Okay, so that's
Those families.
the blue line at the top that's actually going up. In the middle?
yeah, right, that's
Okay,
zero.
Okay.
And so the wetlands have gone up
No, I
13%.
was looking at, so you have, so I was looking at the far right, so wetlands gone up, but I didn't see in the middle column there how the line, the blue line, which is, I guess, bird population's gone up. Okay,
Yeah,
I get
Yeah,
it.
I should have explained the graph
Okay.
better. I'm quite familiar with it, so I just blow through that. But yeah, it's the one that's gone up.
One other question. So this is since 1970. Back to 1900. Is this one of these where it fell off in 1970 or has it been declining since 1900?
Well,
At the same rate? Because again, it's kind of like with when the newscasters come on and say, oh, we're at the average temperature. They're only using the last 3 decades. If they would have used the last 100 decades, we would be over the average all the time, but it's skewed.
Well, so the data is cut off. It started from 1970 forward. So there were certainly declines prior to that. There's some successes and some absolute failures. The carrier pigeon was considered the most common bird in North America, and we hunted it to extinction. So I thought, well, your bluebirds, on the other hand, were in very bad shape around 1900, and their numbers have rebounded substantially, again, through conservation efforts, through bluebird boxes and bluebird society. So there's been, but the net is we're down from, if you go over a longer period. But this data set's just 1970.
There we go. Yeah.
So
Try.
what is the consequence of a loss of species? They liken this to like a Jenga puzzle for ecosystems. So you start taking things out, different dependencies form, but it's less stable. And it can go to ecosystem collapse, as like an Easter Island was a complete collapse due to over exploitation of the timber that they used to build boats, and then imported an invasive rat and so it wiped out that ecosystem. But more problematic and more likely is not ecosystem collapse, but it just degrades its functionality. So that the functions of the ecosystem become less, it doesn't function as well. And it doesn't function as well and we need a lot of those functions for our urbanized society, largely urbanized society. Now, I won't list all of those. I'll talk a little bit about controlling floods. I'll talk a little bit about carbon balance and keeping a healthy CO2 content. Carbon sequestration is actually great potential there for global warming. One study I read recently said that just in reforestation, without removing lands that are used for crop production or other means through reforestation in the United States, we have the potential to capture as much carbon as we currently put out in transportation. So it's a really big potential lever that we can pull. So those are all the services that, and I won't read them to you, that ecosystems provide for us. That's pretty dry, right? That's pretty academic. So how many of you were here for Hurricane Harvey? So 60%. Hurricane Harvey had a huge impact. It's anywhere from, I've seen upwards of 200 deaths directly and indirectly, 200,000 homes, a million cars were destroyed. Huge impact. Okay, so that now get ready for another multiple guess. As how much do you think man's impact on our ecosystems had in increasing Harvey flooding? So this comes from a study that I was cited here. And so just to get how they're measuring it. So they built a model of kind of pre-development hydrological model, current state hydrological models. They history matched them, make sure that they're given decent answers. So then they looked at what was the peak flow pre-development, and at the climate pre-development versus what actually occurred. So how much do you think man's impact on our ecosystems had on increasing Harvey flooding? Was it 15%, 50%, 85%, or 125%? So any questions on, before you vote? Yeah, so
Okay, middle
did I
table,
miss one?
middle table, y'all need to call this talk. Y'all need to talk. Y'all ready to? Okay,
They have to agree.
good. Y'all have consensus.
They have 6,000.
Unanimous consensus? Unanimous consensus? Unanimous consensus?
It's right down the middle, isn't it?
Okay, they're all ready. Yeah.
Doesn't have to have C.
Okay, all right.
More C vote, yeah.
Okay, one more C. Okay. Okay, so back, what have you got? Back table? C, middle? D? Front? D, and virtual says C. Okay, so we got points for virtual, and it was middle, right, that had C? Back row, okay, back row, I'm sorry. All right, so that's made up of 15% worse due to climate change. It's a lot of the range of estimates, but this is one that they decided they could support. 15% more rainfall occurred because of climate change that occurred as of 2017. And the big one, though, is urbanization. And that is just all this impervious surfaces. And this includes all the structures, the dams and other containment structures that are put in to try to counteract, all our urbanization. So even net of that, it was 50% higher it would have been if we hadn't developed the land. So 54%. One other.
So what's a conclusion? I mean, because people talk about, well, we're gonna urbanize based on population growth. So what's the answer? What's the solution?
Well, I'm not sure I'm the person to answer that, but certainly I think that what we're doing is not working in Houston. So I think it's a matter of more containment structures. I think it's a matter of moving houses higher and in places that are in floodplains, we shouldn't be paying to build them again and again and again. And I think there's a big part of having better, and we're already moving this direction, of better natural systems to try to absorb rainfall, get it into the aquifers. And the bayous are good at, they kind of absorb rainfall. I mean, that's the whole civil engineering approach up to now is that let's get it to the river as fast as we can, right? Well, that's not what nature does. Nature tries to hold it and use it, right? So they use some more natural remedies. I think there's a combination of things, but what we're doing doesn't work. Building up, I mentioned that. And the city of Houston's already done that.
Not paving the ground.
Unless impervious surfaces as well, we could. So no, I think that there won't be lots of things can be done. I hope we have the political will to do it.
Not a chance, not a chance.
I can't talk about, I brought the subject up that I shouldn't talk about. Another, there's a World Economic Forum. And they meet every year. And this is people from businesses, people from government, it's from academia. This isn't a bunch of environmentalists. In fact, they're more economists. So they send out a survey and they give 35 threats, right? So there's a committee that puts together candidate threats. And then these 1,000 participants across the globe then rate kind of near term, intermediate term, and long term, which they define as 10 years, over in 10 years as what are the biggest threats globally, okay? The one that's been rising recently, first of all, the green ones are all environmental. So first one, 5 out of 10, top severity, they're all environmental. With climate action failure is number 1, but biodiversity loss is now number 3. That doesn't mean they can see the future, means that's what basically leadership and really knowledgeable people think, and their guess is probably a good informed basis for saying what are our threats. Biodiversity loss is number 3. So we could bend the curve. So this is yet another study. It's World Wildlife Fund. And we'll start to pick up the pace. They looked at, well, what can we do to try to get biodiversity back? And they looked at 3 different kind of areas. What if we do nothing? What if we have supply side changes? That basically means that we produce food and other we should call crops that we use from the land where it's most efficient. Okay, so where you get most out of growing wheat, where wheat grows best, and that has to do with actually some barriers for trade. Anyway, so that was one. And then there was demand side, and that is let's just make the whole system of production, distribution, and use more effective. I mean, we waste a lot of food, for example. There's a lot of waste. So this is another piece in there was if we got more of our protein from plant-based sources rather than animal-based sources. I showed you earlier that we use so much land for livestock. So that would make a big difference. And so would conservation. And that's what a lot of master naturalists are focused on. More preserves, more conservancy, those type of things. This study says, well, if we combine all those, we could, in fact, get the curve back from where it is now. And so this, it can change. There's a long time to get to why natives. Okay, so there's a new idea, not real new, but a new idea that Michael Rosenwig called reconciliation ecology, and that's basically that we create habitats for wildlife to support wildlife where we live, where we work, where we play, right? So not have this constant, oh, is it progress? Is it my livelihood? Or is it the environment clash? But let's figure out ways to do them at the same time. And right smack dab in the middle of doing this is natives in Readal. I mean, that's a perfect example of reconciliation ecology. And why do our yards matter? And this is last piece of data that I want to show. I guess there's a few more, but this is looking at housing units per land area. So what you want to look at is the warm colors at the bottom. So there's kind of a maroon, and then which is city. Suburbs are red, and exurbs, increasingly popular, is in yellow, and this shows what it was based on census data, and then what's forecast to be in 2030. It shows a change over time. Most of this has already occurred.
So how do you define exurbs?
It's in that land, housing units per,
Is it increasing or decreasing in terms of density of?
it's decreasing. So this is going from,
This is people moving out of suburbs and going to urban?
yeah, and this is, let me go back. So I'll play it again. So basically what the trend is, we're becoming more urbanized in general, but we're also, and very recently, becoming not only suburbs are getting bigger as the populations are, but a lot of people like to live in what's called experts. I think where I live is an expert. It's got we have a minimum of 1 acre. If you go west in Montgomery County, you'll find just, some of them are not subdivision, they're just subdivided land, and they'll have trailers or something else. I mean, it's just all over.
Okay.
That's an expert.
Okay,
It's
all right.
kind of, yeah, so it's, and if you look at 2030, most of the eastern United States is really in one of those categories. So more and more of our land is being used by us, basically directly. So why native plants? Well, we absolutely have to have plants. We don't have oxygen, but that's any plant, right? Doesn't have to be a native, it can be a non-native to your area. And it's also where all plants, that's how, sun comes in to the earth. That's our energy input. And then it's where it's converted to biomasses in the plants. But that can be, doesn't need to be a native plant. What's unique to native plants is they're the ones who support ecosystems, because they can talk about that in a minute. And they're the only ones that are native to the ecosystem in which they are, that support a living planet. So, and the reason for that's come back to this millions of years of coevolution, right? The plants try to defend themselves against their predators. Their predators are herbivores, and the biggest herbivores are insects. They're not bunny rabbits, they're rabbits, not mammals in the natural world, and they're not excluding all the cows and the cattle. But in the natural world, the primary herbivore are insects. So the plants have developed defenses, mainly secondary chemicals that make them toxic to the insects, so they won't eat them. And of course, the insects have, and some of them have developed enzymes and capability to overcome them. Some of them, like the monarch, use those chemicals for their own defense, right? But this coevolution is across all 90%, and I'm getting ahead of myself, of insects are specialists. They only eat things that co-evolved with and they recognize as food. Otherwise, it could be that, and they don't have the ability to eat another plant because they don't have the enzymes to break down its defenses.
Let me just clarify. You said 90% of insects are specialists?
That will only eat
A specific plant or
a
plant?
specific plant or genre, or, yeah, right. There are some which that are not that way. This is our, 90% are. They also have adaptations to the physical defenses, and all of this is their life cycles are synchronized. So, and one example of this really complex evolutionary system that I think it's neat, so I tell you about it, is the Paciflora and the long-winged butterfly. So the Paciflora vines have very complex chemical defenses, but the first in their The longleaf butterfly caterpillars are also voracious. And the first instar is cannibalistic. So once it comes out, hatches, it will eat other eggs. And so the butterflies have learned, I guess, through this evolution, that their eggs are going to more likely survive if they lay them, if there's not already an egg on that leaf, right? So the Paciflora realizes this and have created fake eggs, right? To make him think that there's already eggs there. So this constant back and forth, I think, is just fascinating of what's occurred. It's fascinating. So we need insects because they are the primary role, they have the primary role of transferring energy from plant life to other higher forms of life. We absolutely need it for pollination. We need them for decomposition, and they're fundamental for ecosystems. Yes.
So on the previous slide, the plant ended up making fake eggs?
Yes. Yeah, that's a photograph of their, and it goes on from there. I mean, they have different leaf shapes. They have they look like they're wilted and they're not healthy. I mean, they've got more defenses than, I don't know, Carter has liver pills. And it's incredible. But when I was reading about this, it just goes on and on. But I thought this was visually pretty cool. And so insects are vital to key role in ecosystems. Take away the insects, ecosystems will collapse. So I already talked about the 90% of plant insects are specialists. They produce 35 times the caterpillar. Mass is alien plants, and they're also essential for all North America, 96% of terrestrial North American birds. That's what birds feed their young, is insects. Principally larvae, but also other insects. So if you take away insects, if you take away the native plants, take away the insects, take away the birds, right? And that's their bird populations are limited by their food that they can find to raise their young. So it's absolutely essential. So new multiple guess. This is from Ptolemy's book, and it's based on one of his doctorate students' research on chickadees. These are some chickadees in my yard a few years ago. So how many insects do you think it takes to raise an average chickadee clutch? And it's either 4 or 5, typically, up till from the time it hatches to the time they fledge, right? So is it 500,000, 2,500 or 7,500 insects?
Yes.
Okay.
How long do they take?
It's about 2 weeks. It's about 2 weeks. I think 12 or 13 days, I don't know.
It's a little longer. We had some this spring. I'm trying to remember the dates.
I was
but-
thinking it was your deep.
I thought it was 2 weeks or so.
Yeah,
Or maybe I'm thinking of bluebirds.
From the
It's about 2
time
weeks.
they lay their eggs to when they leave the nest, it's like 21 days.
Is it?
Yeah, from the day that they
Okay.
lay the egg, but then they gotta sit on it. and that
Okay,
hatches.
I'm going from hatch
Okay,
to
yeah.
fledge.
Yeah, so
But
it's about
usually the
It's like
hatch is
3
about
weeks to like fledge though. Have you stopped
from,
checking in
from,
the
from eggs to fledge.
From hatch to fledge is
I
like
think 3 weeks.
Yeah, but you're supposed to stop checking after 2 weeks, so they don't
Okay.
like fledge too early. We had them this spring, it was really exciting. I thought of all those caterpillars that were getting eaten.
Okay, so we've got answers.
It's actually not very-
Okay, what do we got on the
On line D.
D? Back row? Okay, everybody got it. So can 1 yard make a difference? This is a picture that's out of Talame's presentation. And it's actually slated his Nature's Best Hope book. So this is a yard in Chicago. It's 1/10 of an acre, right near O'Hare. Right? So this is very tiny yard, very suburban, urban. The lady who owns this property, there's some 200 plant species. She's added, I think, 65 native plant species to her yard since she's had it over 25 years. She's observed 103 different bird species in that yard. 103. And lots of them nest there. I don't remember now the number, but lots of them nest. So 1 yard natives can make a big difference. So that's my front yard, and I'm going to make the point that the more diversity of plants that you have, native plants, more diversity of wildlife you have. So one of my, Lisa mentioned, my hobbies is trying to identify and photograph all the species in my yard. And this is one suborder. This is just butterflies over the last 18 months. So I'll flip through there quickly. Not the most pretty one, but so the number is 29. Different species I've observed so far. I've got 2 new ones this year. I think I have about 150 species. I'm going to get my sort of a guess. We've added 67 native species, and of the host plants for those, 29 butterflies, I have the host for 20 of them, most of which have added. So basically we're farming caterpillars. The other big addition I would say is that to wildlife was when we put in a pond. That was a really big change in terms of the number of things that we see.
How big are your ponds?
It's about 20 by 12. And it's, the deepest point is about 4 feet, but it has a lot of shelf that's like a foot deep. It's something called a natural pond that they're supposed to be where we won't grow algae. That if you got the right ratio, I haven't got that mastered yet, but there's a whole science about these native plant ponds, and don't put it in invasive. Okay, that's just one hint. So I started with one. I'm still trying. I didn't realize it, you know. I'm still trying to get it. Huh?
You're still fighting.
I'm still fighting it. Yeah. Okay, so the pipevine, which I think is one of the most spectacular of all butterflies, just gorgeous. You have to have an Astrolochia host plant in your yard. The one I have is not a native because the native is called Dutchman's pipe. This is Brazilian pipevine. It's much easier to find and it's much easier to grow, but it's actually probably in the top 5 of the most populous butterflies in our yard this year.
One question on the chat.
Yeah.
Let's see. We are trying to go native in our yard. If there were 2 native plants to start with, what would be the most beneficial, but not too difficult to grow?
Great segue. And you only have one plant. Make it a no. This is a list of our ecosystem, and you can find this on the National Wildlife Foundation's website, Native Plant Finder. All right, so it lists by genus in your area, how many caterpillars are hosted, right? And the champion, and this is across the globe, are oaks. Then prunus, and then the willows, and then of the perennial plants, goldenrods are highest, right close to the sunflowers, and then hibiscus. So those. So if you had to start with one, and then I think it's kind of dealer's choice. What do you want to rent? And you'll talk about this. Lisa's going to talk about it. Lisa's going to give you lots of good choices, and she'll talk about that. So I've talked about diversity of wildlife. It's a big benefit. Lower maintenance, I think, is also a big benefit. You don't need biological pest control if you have native plants. It's not, you don't see any plants that are totally killed biologically, with a couple of exceptions that I must note. You have to protect your plants from deer. I've lost them to deer. And believe it or not, I've lost a couple to swamp rabbits. Right? So little, when they're young, and it's only in the winter. They attack the embryo. They attack I've had them. Yeah.
I don't know what a swamp rabbit is.
It's our local cocktail.
Okay.
It's our local cocktails.
All right.
Yeah. That picture back here. I don't know. Back here, I had a picture of
Yeah.
that was a swamp.
Okay.
Plant survivability. They're adapted to our extremes of cold. In Winter Storm Uri, we lost 5 species. They were not one of them was a native in our yard. They'll do better in drought. They'll take less water. This is a very extreme event, so it won't survive. Other than the very well established plants, something as extreme as what we're experiencing right now. But they take a lot less water conservation. And to me, this is increasingly a big one, is a sense of place and season. I like having a yard that looks like it fits in the natural environment, that it's in harmony with the environment that we live in, and it changes seasonally. This to me is an increasingly big deal, and we don't have all the beautiful foliage of New England. It's really, but we have lots of fall beauty, and these are just a few examples of native plants taken in my yard, and we have a number of plants like sassafras, and you'll talk about those that do bring fall color. So these are kind of my reasons that improve the quality of our life. My wife and I both feel this way. They conserve water and in turn money, which is a good thing, and they add the enjoyment of our life. And the last one, I don't really know what to call it, except it feels good to be what you're doing in your yard, what you're working on in your yard is aligned with your values. My favorite car that I've had since my first one is the one I own right now. It's a plug-in hybrid, and I get all my electricity from sustainable sources. And it makes me feel good to know that it's aligned with my values. I really, and I think the same thing is true of native plants. Anyway, so that's what I had. I do have a discussion point. I think you guys are probably ready for a break. I know you are. So this is the typical landscape on the top, right? That's kind of typical. And the one at the bottom, I'd say, is kind of the other extreme end of the curve of very natural. There's not even any, but what we see is way more like the top than the bottom. So why do you, I've got some ideas, but why do you think, why is that so? Why is it?
You can make a business of growing the stuff on the top more than you can the native stuff that you can find around the corner. It's easier to grow grass as a business and make money off of it than it is to, hey, find this plant, I got it from the corner, you'll find it in the woods.
Yeah, that's kind of hard to compete with. Okay.
Another major reason is it's a lot quicker to roll out sod than it is to spread seed.
Yep. Yeah, instant landscape, almost instant landscaping. Yep.
One of the chats said easy for the builder.
Yep. Easy maintenance.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's what you see on all the TVs everywhere. It's been PR everywhere.
Exactly. That's what we see. So we're kind of accustomed. That must be the right thing to do because that's what we see.
Everybody else does it.
It's kind of a social pressure kind of
What you
perception.
grow up with. It's your culture. It's your culture.
Yeah.
It's your culture.
The southern garden, right?
Like,
Yeah, a lot of those plants are from Southeast Asia. Azaleas, I mean, everyone southern gardens got azaleas from Southeast Asia. Okay.
I'm gonna be positive here. I'm gonna say it's due to ignorance. Do better than to.
I think lack of
Lack of
education, lack of knowledge.
Yes.
Like the height we mow our lawns.
And I want to say too, a little bit of fear, like people see this and they think it's gonna be a lot more expensive or a lot more work. So they fear that the transition is just something that they can't handle.
Yeah, and it's sort of related to, it's easier to mow a lawn. You know, you can do that. And it's also, it's easier to outsource. Easy to outsource.
There's
Yep.
one more, and it's the most annoying one, the homeowners associations.
Yeah, some HOA, some of them actually are supportive. The Woodlands is somewhat supportive, but it's the exception rather than the rule. Yeah. Any other? No, you deserve a break. Thank you for staying awake for the entire thing. I'll give you all mine. And I think there's a certain one, the only ones I mentioned are a lot of non-natives are colorful. I mean, let's get real here. I mean, man, azaleas are pretty. Crepe Myrtles are pretty and they're colorful. I mean, I think there's sometimes more fear than appreciation of nature. People are afraid of snakes. Okay, let's just.
That's it. They mowed an entire, in the cul-de-sac near me, it had an understory, an upper story, and surrounded by wildflowers. Somebody knew them on the cul-de-sac. They scraped it all off. Yes, I couldn't drive right for it. Because every time I would, I would just cringe. It was so, you get people who just, and that was her excuse. She said, there are snakes that are living in there. And I thought, well, now they're all around.
And related to that is that less people are growing up around nature and they're not, I mean, they're more fearful of, they're not playing out and seeing snakes when they're kids and saying, well, they're not that bad.
You don't take them up.
Yeah.
Don't play the circle.
Thank you very much. Another?
I mean, that one of these is a real limited availability. Where do you get them?
Did you talk about that? That is a big problem. So the best local source I found, I think, is Nature's Way. I don't want to just plug them, but they're really a good source of
That's down here,
natives.
where is that? It's
It's in Woodlands, so it's, on extend 1488 to go east of I-45.
Little back road.
Yeah, and they started mainly with mulches and things like that, but they've got a big landscaping department now. Several people in our chapter work there and are, so that's a good source.
My source, and that's, I'm sure.
What about
Kim's has some, but not. They're gonna be pricey anyway.
The native plant, pines and, excuse me, pines and,
I voted against.
sorry, Pines and Prairies is our local chapter of Native Plant Society. Because I can't think of all of them off the top of my head. So if you just Google Pines and Prairies, you get, and they have a page that has all listing of all local sources and also native landscapers. So it's a good source.
And
It
they
is-
do plant sales.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, Mercer does plant sales.
Mercer does, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
The
Lisa.
Houston chapter of the Native Plant Society puts out a seriously good list every month. That has like plant sales that are coming up, this, and this. If there are any, but I mean, or maybe just a couple of times a year when it has the long list of the plant sales for the spring and fall.
There are a few nurseries. I know Growers Outlet in
Growers
in
Outlet.
Willis. And then there's one in Montgomery. They have like an actual section
Yeah.
in their nursery that's native only plants.
Yeah,
Does Master Gardeners
that,
have a second?
the Master Gardeners in Huntsville,
We do.
yeah.
Yes, they do that.
I don't know about Montgomery
Yeah,
County.
they didn't have anything the last.
You guys get rid of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
I have a question, it may be kind of silly, but couldn't we just procreate native plants, like picking from
Yes.
that we find on the side of the road and
Yes.
just propagate them?
Yes.
Yeah, you're supposed to, if they're in public land, you're fine. You're supposed to ask the landowner. But yeah. And there's a lot of seed collecting that goes on by the native plants.
I buy seeds online and then I propagate from.
What is the native seed? Are you being sure?
The place in Junction.
There's a native seed.
Yeah.
Native,
Native American.
yeah, there's native. seed
I may have those.
Okay,
Yeah, there's native seeds in Junction, Texas, that you can order seeds
You
there.
can
But
order
local,
seed mixes, you can order individual species, you can buy
So it gets the shade.
prairie seed packages for your area.
this
Yeah, they
is,
have a whole range of stuff there.
this is sort of nerdy, but locally sourced is actually better.
Yeah.
They do better, so, and that's the only downside of ordering seeds remotely is
Yeah.
they're not gonna do as well if you can get locally sourced plant
So the
stuff.
rule of thumb's like 100 miles, right? Or, I'm not sure. Somehow that number, that little nugget stick came out that, I think it's 100 miles. If you can't get your seeds within 100 miles of where you are, is that right?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I may have made it.
Okay,
You
somebody
should
on.
put economics up here. And I'm behind almost everything in America, it's economic profit.
Yeah, well, I think the low cost to build, I did get low cost to build. I mean,
Are native plants as profitable as what nurseries are selling?
that it hasn't been historically because there's, people like pretty plants and the trade has been pretty plants and so that they're set up basically. Now there's a move to more, but I think that's what's more readily sells and then,
There, it seems like there's a push for xeriscaping, but that's not the same as native plants.
yeah, it's just, yeah, it's designed around water conservation more than anything, but it's typically native plants that are used.
So there's someone online who says that there is an email newsletter called The Lazy Gardener.
Yes.
And if y'all haven't subscribed to that newsletter yet, they list a lot of plant sales in the area. And John Ferguson, who owns Nature's Way Resources, is one of the editors. So The Lazy Gardener Friends is what it's called. And they don't They don't just do natives. I know that they've had lots of articles on the newsletter about roses or whatever. And so, so you just have to kind of read it, but it will list native plant sales in the area. Okay?
Mike, thank you very much. That was excellent.
You bet. With a round of applause. I didn't bring in, I should have brought a native plants. I wasn't thinking. Back row won the family feud. So, I won't give them break.
Yeah. Break, guys. 15-minute break.
That's a good example of someone who lives around here and does that. Yeah. You can see that other picture down there at the bottom. Who knows? I can be my own. You brought up a picture of your yard.
Didn't look like that good, right? It's.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just driving down. I know there's and so closer to the house. But then I know and just to run out. So this is my first time ever to have everything
She was even smart enough to show it to one.
because I didn't want to
Right. Oh, yes.
I started on my yard. Yeah.
They're always there.
Oh, good. I noticed you had to sign.
Yeah, I know, right?
Oh,
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, exactly. So Mike, are you giving a talk at the meeting? Are you giving a talk at the meeting? Annual meeting.
Yeah. Whatever. Where did you get? Yeah.
Bobby calls it 50% definitely.
I know.
And he doesn't realize
But I will say,
I run for yes. So I'm gonna run down there to you.
You got one for me? Yep. Love that. Thank you. Would you mind to switch out right here? This is very handy. That is very handy. You see, I have this right here. I have the power plug in. Just a chubby one.
Yeah.
And then this is my other picture there.
Let's tell them about the bats tonight too. Let's remember to tell them about the bats tonight too.
Oh, the people here.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody.
No.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's right. It's kind of hot. USB. Is it a TMN?
I'll tell you, I kind of can't because I put them on my, that's why it's like I'm gonna tell you. Anyway, so anyway, so I just went to get off my main and it wasn't there. And I said, I'm like, thank you.
Every time I do it, I have to get on the internet. Huh? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Two of my sons, one was only 7 months, Roland Doodle. Yeah, my dog. My wife's rear end. So we're going to get private backwards until she gets further training. Yeah. 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 She's a lovely dog. She's very alpha. She's 7 months alpha. Yeah, I'm watching her a lot.
I figured out something.
Okay, yeah.
I don't know. And I'm just, I'm at that stage where now I've got multiple friends, and I'm just letting whatever is growing, let it just grow. Now, as I spread
Right.
what is this?
Very discouraging. Yeah, I know that. My buddy. But I had
Okay, guys, everybody? Okay, so I get to introduce Lisa, even though she's perfectly capable of introducing herself. Because Lisa, let me tell you, the first time I saw Lisa, she was doing a talk about plants in her yard. And I was just amazed at the energy, this little ball of energy. You know, dynamite comes in small packages. That's Lisa. That's all the introduction. Okay, there you go. Lisa is a retired environmental health and safety professional and a current adjunct professor at the Lee College Huntsville Center. She teaches geology and learning strategies at 8 prison units in and around Huntsville and Navasota. In addition to Texas Master Matches, Lisa is a Walker County Master Gardener and a member of the Herb Society of America, Texas Time, THYM. She pretty much loves all things plants, and she's going to be speaking at the annual meeting. In October, write this down, October 20th to the 23rd, annual meeting in Houston this year. So you don't have to travel north or west or south, it's right there in Houston, okay? Okay, you ready?
Right. Yes, ma'am. Here you go. Thank you. You are welcome. Okay, so as Mike told y'all earlier, he and I have been teaming on these presentations for several years now. And so he does the why we need to use native plants, and then I do the how. So here we go. This was from my former house. This was the first year that I planted a pollinator garden. And so this was my pollinator bed. And I had this big ass, and my son-in-law asked me how big it was. And I said, well, it's 60 feet long. And he said, oh my gosh, 60 feet. You ought to be able to see that from Google Earth. and you could. Oh, really? I was so excited. Yeah, it was very exciting. Okay. Okay, so the issue, as Mike said, is that half the world's land is used to feed humans somehow, some way, either as pasture land for animals or growing the crops directly or whatever. So that means a significant loss of habitat for other species that reduces their chance of survival. Without these insects, the food web collapses. And so in Doug Tallamy's latest book, Nature's Best Hope, it's all about creating individual spaces that will all connect, because he's saying it's not just going to be the losses of species are going to mean the loss of the whole ecosystem, because we may lose like a whole layer, or we may lose so many that the whole thing collapses. And so it's more critical than just losing a few beetles. Okay, so what to do? So I say, and most of these pictures were taken at the place that we just sold this place last year, but most of these pictures were taken there. So this was a native milkweed from there. So provide nectar and pollen for the adults and provide host plants for the offspring. So we got to have it coming and going. And the nectar and pollen are gonna give them the sugar and the protein that they need. And they're gonna, I'll go into it later, but they'll need it all year round. So you wanna plant some that bloom here, here, and here. And then the host plants for the offspring. What we typically hear about is milkweed. Oh, we got that milkweed for the monarchs, and yeah, that's a big thing. But as Mike had mentioned, every single butterfly and moth, they're specialists. So as he showed the pipevine, and I think I may have that same picture in here. If you want a pipevine swallowtail, you need to have pipevine. If you want this other kind of swallowtail, you need to have either fennel or yeah, thank you. And but different herbs. But anyway, they're specialists, and so you've got to have their host plants, or their babies have nothing to eat. Okay, so what to consider when planting? And I'll tell y'all right now, when before I hooked up with Maryann and those of her ilk and actually learned more about gardening, I did gardening by hoping for the best. I don't recommend that. Because you know, sometimes they made it and sometimes they didn't, you know, just saying. But so a lot of this is about some things to, just what to consider. Okay, what you want to accomplish in that spot. For the purposes of this presentation, what we're wanting to accomplish is supporting pollinators. But it may be what I want to accomplish is, I have this one place in my yard that, well, when I was in Dickinson, I had this 4-foot diameter oak tree in the front, and water just channeled down from it. And if I would have had a little bit more yard, it would have been a great spot to have put like a little water feature. And so you may have something like that where you've got just a seat that goes this way. And so that may be what you're wanting to accomplish in that spot. It may be something completely different, but for this presentation, it's supporting pollinators. Consider the soil, consider how much sun. I didn't actually know until I was doing this presentation, there's a definition for sun, part shade. And full sun is defined as 6 hours. So you have something you put out there in full sun, well, you know what? It doesn't really mean 14 when it's 10 to 16. Okay. How much water you get and where the plant normally grows versus where you are. I can't tell you the number of native plant cells I've been to, and I got a native plant, and then I got it home instead of 2 weeks, and that's because then I looked it up. Well, now I look them up before I buy them. But again, that gardening by hoping for the best thing. But anyway, and it only grows in Big Bend, and I'm going, really? Why are you selling this in the Piney Woods? And so anyway. Okay, so what I want to accomplish. This was, is that garlic or onion? One of those. Anyway, that was in my yard. Okay, so I want to attract and support pollinators. They evolved with the native plants, and so did other insects. They need nectar and host plants. Be sure the pollinator that you're planting for is actually in your area. Okay, but I'll tell the story on myself too. Okay, when I was first doing a pollinator garden, looking at all these plants and these butterflies and stuff, and I said, ooh, look at this, I'm going to attract this butterfly, and so I need this plant, and I bought seeds, and then I told one of my gardening buddies who has a clue that what I was doing, and I said, oh, I'm going to do this, it attracts this butterfly, and she said, oh, are they in this area? Maybe. They would be. Anyway, make sure that you actually get something that's here, just saying. Okay, and know when the pollinator is coming through. Okay, look at the monarchs. Okay, they're in, they go north and then they go home to Mexico. They need nectar and pollen coming and going. They need the milkweed when they're coming so they can lay eggs. You don't want to put the milkweed when they're going back, particularly not the tropical milkweed, because they lay eggs. The ones that stay are the ones that are sick. And so you don't want it going back, but you want it coming up. Okay, but the nectar, they're gonna need it coming and going. Okay, one thing that I learned, and I did like dotted plants, oh, let's have color everywhere, you know, and so, and it turns out they need like 3-foot groupings of color, They see, you know, white, red. And I didn't know that, and so I had them all mixed up. Diverse bloom times, again, they're gonna need nectar at different times. Variety of flower shapes and sizes. Some of them will have long proboscis, some of them have little fat noses, and so they all need their different flower shapes. Diverse colors. Avoid pesticides and plants that are embedded with them. It is really rude to invite them for dinner and then kill them for eating it. Just saying. And so if you go to buy a plant and it says guaranteed no bugs, well, that's because it was grown with something that's going to kill everybody. I avoid those. Again, terribly rude to invite them to dinner and then kill them for eating it. Okay, avoid hybrids and include natives in your garden. A hybrid is something that has been created. Like I think, you know, I think that one reason that the nursery industry doesn't do a lot of natives is they're always wanting to create new things, you know, for new sales. It's a marketing thing. And so a hybrid may be, yeah, 2 things that they made, and a hybrid won't reproduce, you know, so that would be the one, I guess, good thing about it. I'm trying to go totally native, and I do have some that are non-native that are pollinator magnets. I'm all about pollinators. I'm all about pollinators. So, and I know that some of the host plants for pollinators are herbs that came from Europe, that they've been here long enough, and that's what the babies need. I'm absolutely putting those. I just had, even though I planted a new pollinator bed, and I don't know what I'm going to be able to keep alive in it, since we haven't had water in 6 weeks, but any rain at all, and it's, you know, 110 degrees. You know, I was working in my yard, and I'd go in for stuff, and every time I came out, my dogs came out with me. And then they stood there like 3 seconds, and they went back. Okay, went back in through the dog door into the air conditioning, and then I looked at my phone, and it said Huntsville, 100 degrees, feels like 110. My dogs are smarter than I am.
Our cats are.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, soil can be a challenge. So, and unless you're planting in a pasture, and that may not even do. Or your house was built before 1960, you may not have native soil. The foundations of a house are typically on or in clay, and new building codes can require a different elevation. Okay, so my sister at one point had a 3-story, like this vertical living thing inside the loop in Houston. Okay, so me out in really rural Walker County, my sister inside the loop. How did that happen? But anyway, okay, so you see this was built in like the 60s. And then this was this in Rice Military, and this lot got raised, and they put 4 houses right next to each other. You see that foot difference? That's because the building code changed. Okay, so used to, I think Houston had to be 10 feet above sea level, now 11 feet, and then 12 feet. I think now it's 12 or 13, depending on where you are, but that's the building code. So one reason that you'll see when they just absolutely level everything is because they may have to, because they have to raise the whole thing a foot or 2. And they'll do it just for ease of building too. But still, there was a subdivision that was in Clear Lake called something, I can't remember the name. Anyway, it was on Bay Area Boulevard, and they sold for a premium lots that had the really big trees, and they kept them. But then what they ended up doing was putting all this soil on top of them, and every tree died, because yeah, they can only get like what, 1 inch a year, 2 inches a year. I mean, something really small. Really small. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
So for instance, like the flower beds, your new flower beds that you're putting together,
Yes, ma'am.
and you want to have native soil to grow these native plants,
You
Where do
don't
you-
have to.
because when you build them up, where are you getting the soil? I mean, when you go to buy soil. do
I'm
they
not gonna
sell-
have native soil, not there, but what I'm gonna try to do, let me go to the slide. Okay, this was when I was building my house that I sold last year. We kind of built on, I guess. And so it just happened, or it was straight and then it kind of did this. So we ended up having to bring in something like 40 dump truck loads of clay. Yeah, I mean, it was significant. And what he did, he pushed all of the topsoil over to the side, dumped the clay. I'm a geoscientist, so I made him bring a sheep's foot and do it instead of running over it with the wheels of his dump truck, which was his plan. Then he pushed off, and so they packed it, the ever-loving crud out of it, and then pushed the topsoil back over it. Okay, but you see that this is just a little hand spade. So this, I mean, this literally, this far down. So what I had was topsoil back here. And then it's just really, really hard packed clay. That's what you're also going to see in a subdivision, because they have to have clay for the foundation of the house, not this much clay, but they're still going to need it. And what they try to do in a subdivision is only go to the footprint of the house because it's just less costly. But you're still going to have clay and actually some concrete, cement, debris, right around your flower beds around your house. Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's not going to be native soil, but still you can plant natives even with that. You just may need to amend it. So even if you don't have native soil, still plant native.
I was just thinking about the other bed that you had, the little wine
Yeah.
one at your other place.
That was native.
So, but the problem I'm having is I've tried multiple times and my things keep dying. And I keep getting answers from people saying, well, it's probably your soil. But like when you go somewhere, the nurseries or wherever, to buy bags of soil, I never see bags that say native soil.
Well,
Like what it would,
Well,
what
and
did
it
you buy
may
to put
change,
in
it
there?
may change. Walker County, for instance, has it's either 3 or 4 different whole ecoregions in it. And so depending, and even on my 100 acres that I had, it had 2. And so it may be this here and this here on the little 5 acres that I have right now. This is like pure sand right here. And this is the clay that the original people who built that house, they dug a pond over here. So it's a borrow pit pond. They borrowed the clay there and used it for the foundation of the house. And that's on 5 acres.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it may be, maybe you need to aerate it or loosen it or something, and then amend it with something else. I would get some just organic garden soil.
So we had all that nasty red clay packed around our house, and
Uh-huh.
nothing would grow. Nature's way, leaf mulch compost, get it, mulch it in there.
There you go. Okay, so here's an example. Okay, so this my ex-husband, this oak tree and that oak tree. Oh, there's Gracie. This oak tree and that oak tree were planted at exactly the same time. Okay, this one was planted beyond the imported clay. This, and again, gardening by hoping for the best. Here's what not to do. And this one was planted closer to the house. So it was in the clay. It lost its leaves long before the other ones did. It never got much bigger than this. It sprouted leaves. It budded out in the spring long after the other ones did. Finally, I took it out. Finally, I took it out because I think that its roots just never got any purchase. Because it was in the
because of the clay, it couldn't grow into the clay.
Yeah. It just never made it. Finally, I took it out. Okay, so what does this mean? You can and should still plant natives. If you have an extra 6 inches of clay, no worries. Natives typically have deep roots. Just dig below the clay to ensure the roots go there and fill in with a mix of the clay that you dug out and and native soil, or as close as you can get, some organic stuff, something but mix them together, because what's gonna happen if you don't mix them together, it's gonna be like a bowl, particularly if you're in a clay, it's New Orleans. So all the water is gonna sit in there, but plus the roots are gonna go, ooh, I really like this, and it's not gonna wanna go out into this stuff that's harder. It's not gonna wanna go out to the native stuff, because it's used to this and it's gonna stay there. So mix it together. Okay, if you have several feet of non-native clay, that's more challenging. There are 2 schools on the whole. I think it's Howard Garrett that says dig an ugly hole. He says, make sure that it's not just round, because if it's just round and then you're going into straight clay, then the roots are just gonna circle. So he digs an ugly hole. He's got little things, so then it goes out into those. What my twin brother does, and everything he's ever planted, and he is not a gardener, but he does this just because he doesn't want to dig a very big hole, and it works. And this is what I started doing in Dickinson, and it worked in that straight clay. Dig a hole just the same size as the pot, then the roots are gonna have to go out. They have to go. Yeah. And again, fill in with a mix of the clay you just dug up. But you've got to give the water a place to go. So when I planted stuff that was in the clay that we'd imported and packed in the other place, then if it was something that was on enough of a slope, then I dug a trench so that when I watered it, the water could get out, so that I didn't drown it. Okay, soil, think outside the bed. Okay, so back to my sister's 3-story thing inside the loop in Houston. Okay, this was her next door neighbor. Who was her? Okay, now this was interesting too. Those Black River rocks? She took them and put them sideways. And it was beautiful. A lot of rocks, but gosh, it looked really good. Okay, but the possibilities for most of these aren't natives, but they could have been. They absolutely could have been. She didn't want to have to mow a yard, so she put down astroturf inside her yard and then put these planters in there. It was beautiful. She had the biggest yard. This was the big yard because they were like right there together. But she put these planters in there. These all could have been natives if you want to. She had these things hanging up, and I think that's air potato. Kind of hideous, but still, these could have been native. This is a Texas star hibiscus that I gave her, and she put it in this pot and put it right in between her. And this is her house. This is my sister's. They were pretty close. But think outside the bed. Okay. Sun versus shade. Okay, so direct sun, full sun is 6 hours a day. Part sun is 3 to 6, part shade 2 to 4. Dappled shade comes through trees or a filtered shade is no more than 2 hours of sun a day. Vegetables may need 8 to 10 hours of direct sun a day. Flower gardens, not so much. The vegetables can take it, but even with the 110 degrees, even your vegetable garden is going to need watering right now. The plants may need the full sun to set buds and flower, but not the heat or the dry conditions that come with it. If try morning sun, if you have the location. And this is where I got all the definitions of full sun, part shade. Okay, sun versus shade. Okay, since we built in a pasture, I had like 6 inches of shade, 6 square inches. So, I mean, I had none. The only shade was from another plant, that I put in. So anyway, but I got this ginger, and I'm going, surely, I can find a place for this because it's just so pretty. Okay, so the one place that I have just morning sun was at the end of, this was originally my little water thing, from the water well, but then it was just became a shed. But anyway, it's 8 feet wide. And so I planted the ginger down here, and this was in imported clay. So what I did was dig a trench from here and then I have a little bit of a slope and I put in a French drain so that I wouldn't drown everything in there. So again, I've got to let the water go somewhere if I'm planting clay. This was my sister's house in League City before she did the thing inside the loop. This is ginger where it loves to grow, which was in the shade. This stuff got 10 feet tall. Yeah, I hung up these huge flowers and I'm like, oh yeah. Well, one year her landscaper cut it all down to nubs and it grew back, but ooh, that was not a pretty day. Okay, so anyway, so for me, it was ginger where it was living on the edge. I had this native pigeonberry here, and it was fine. There was enough shade, pigeonberry kind of like shade, but there was enough shade there that I didn't fry it. Water. How much water does the spot get? So for whatever it is you're gonna plant, and select the plant that is suited to the water and sun levels. Natives, as a rule, tend to require less water, but there are some natives that want water. There's a thing called a swamp sunflower. How much water do you think that bad boy's going? A bit. Okay, and so you don't want to plant it in a really dry spot. Okay, natives typically have much longer roots, so will do better. You might need to water even low water natives while they're being established. This is why the bed I planted this year isn't going to look good. It's being established and now we've had a drought for a month and a half. If you have zero shade, so they get more than 10 hours of sun and during a drought. So it's got some shade, but it's not looking good for that bed.
Lesson that I learned about the watering too is I put plants by plants.
Yeah.
This plant likes a lot of water, this plant don't, and I didn't look at that.
Yes.
And then I planted them together.
Yes.
So then I'm watering them, and this one's loving it, and then it kills this one.
Yes, exactly. I know, I usually say that. Thank you for bringing that up because that totally went out of there. Yes. Yes.
Or like if you're doing vegetables, I put cucumbers next to tomatoes. My tomatoes never got enough water to fill out. They would literally grow about this big and just like turn into this just gross sludge.
That's probably because they got too much water. Tomatoes that kind of like dry feet.
Okay,
Yeah, the cucumbers need a lot more water than the tomatoes do.
okay.
And what my almost 90-year-old neighbor down the street had told me some years ago was that you water at the dirt level for tomatoes and soil level, sorry. Did you hear me say dirt? No. But anyway, water the ground once a week thoroughly and then don't do anything. Yeah. Now.
That makes sense. I was watering the cucumbers every single day.
Yes, and so that was what happened to your tomatoes. They kind of drowned. Yeah.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and in fact, I've been watering I put in a vegetable garden too. And so I'm watering it, but I didn't do the drip works thing yet because I don't know if I'm gonna really end up with it right there. But I bought these really nice soaker hoses, best soaker hoses I've ever had. I got off Amazon. That I put the little 4 thing and each one turns off. So I turn off the one on the tomatoes.
Okay.
When I water everything else. And then turn off the one, like some of the stuff that needs the herbs that like drier feet.
Okay.
Okay, so define native. Is the plant native to your area of Texas or does it only grow in Big Bend? Is that right? And is it may be a cultivar of a true native. Okay, that's also kind of annoying to me too, to go to a native plant sale and then they say, oh yeah, this is an Esperanza and it's native, but it's a cultivar that makes it coral colored instead of yellow. Okay, to me, that's not native. And I want like the real deal. Lantana too. Yeah, and there's like one native Lantana. There's some that have been produced just for Texas. And like the yellow ones, because I don't vaguely remember the name of it, and they'll grow anywhere, and the pollinators will like them, and they're actually sturdier than the native, but I still want the native. And remember herbs, because many herbs are host plants. Okay, so this was my butterfly garden the first year. And this, I had black-eyed Susan, brown-eyed Susan, Confederate daisy, vervain. Oh, I went to a plant sale and actually paid good money for vervain, and I found it everywhere. Milkweed, columbine, Mexican hat, zinnias. I don't think zinnias are native. Mealy blues, but they're pollinator magnets, and they really needed the nectar. And okay, Mealy blue sage, then dill, parsley, and basil, because those are all host plants. Look at this. This was my first year. I had 43 swallowtail caterpillars on my dill. 43. God, I was just beside myself. I put it on Facebook, and my sister called me. She actually looked at me. She said, "You just put worms on Facebook?" And anyway, that still excites me. Can't take me anywhere. Okay, but then check this. Okay, so here I am thinking, yeah, I'm all that. I'm all that. Look at that, 43 caterpillars. And then I go over to my sister's, and this was when she lived in Lake City, and I see six. She had like these pots, these big pots, like 4 of them lined up just alongside her garage. And she put dill in one, basil in one. She had 4 different herbs. And I see all these swallowtail caterpillars on her parsley, and I'm going, oh my God, this is like a one plant, totally unintentional, but one plant butterfly garden. So my point on this was that even one plant makes a difference. One plant. But I go inside and I said, oh my gosh, Linda, oh, you've got all these swallowtail caterpillars on your parsley. And she said, oh, do I need to spray it? No! Don't you did get parsley, are you kidding me? And 3 blocks from there. And anyway, yeah, it's a little bit different, you know, in our interest. But so this was just so thrilling to me. So thrilling because one plant can make a difference. So there's some people want to, I like all natives, so I'm totally different with that. And some people said everybody should do all natives. My goal is to have 5 native plants in every garden, because it'll change everything. And then after that, maybe you'll have 6, and then 7, and then 8, and then 9, because you're just going to be getting so many more butterflies. And I mean, it's. My sister told me I could put natives in her yard. I said, yeah, as long as they have big green leaves, they're evergreen, they have huge, really colorful flowers. Never mind, because that's just probably not going to happen. And certainly not for every plant. Okay, so now I want to talk about specific plants. Any questions other than that? Okay, so trees. Okay. So this is a black tupelo, and what I did on these, since I was kind of obsessed on this presentation, I went to the wildflower.org. Yeah, and looked all these up. So where it's like, well, can we post these presentations? Right? Yeah. Okay. So I put like special value to honeybees, and then who uses it. And if it said it's a larval host for this particular one, then I put that on there. Okay, so black tupelo, special value to honeybees, American sweet gum. Everybody kind of hates them, but look, it's a larval host for a Luna moth. That's what that is. That's a Luna moth pupa. This thing was so big. I found it hanging from an oak tree. So it, you know, started off on the sweet gum or whatever it started off on. And then when it was ready to form its pupa, it went into the oak tree. And this thing was so big. I mean, I thought it was, I said, what is this? A hummingbird nest? You know what? So I sent it to a friend of mine, and she said, well, it kind of looks like a cocoon, but it sure is big. And I'm going, oh my God. Because sadly, I had just seen one of my cats playing with it. Yeah, so it didn't go well for him, but still. Okay. Did I get, yeah, just one. Okay, Drummond red maple. larval host to many sphinx moths, seeds for birds and squirrels. The deer will eat these. And I start off with trees because here's the deal. A lot of people don't want to have a plant that's going to get eaten down to the nuts in their flower beds. I'm okay with that. People may not be. There is never going to, no matter how many sphinx moth caterpillars I get in this, they're never going to eat every leaf on the tree. So trees are a really, really good choice as a host plant. Okay, and then this is their pollen. Okay, the box elder maple, larval host for the silk moth, special value to honeybees. Oaks, this is the one that was the top of the line on Mike's table. Okay, I just listed just 10 butterflies. There was, the list was too long to put on the slide for everything that oaks are a host plant for. If you only planted one thing, plant an oak. If you plant two things, my second one would be a native black cherry. Okay, attracts songbirds. The substrates used for by insectivorous birds. Nuts and pollens provide food for wildlife, nesting and cover, larval host. I mean, an oak tree is just for supporting everybody. Okay, fringe tree. Oh, I love these. I love these. There was one that coming in to my street. There was one like right on Mathistery Road, and going, oh, I'm gonna come get some seeds when they appear on you, because this is what they look like. And there's a native. Southern Living did an article on it called the best native tree nobody grows, but it's a larval host to several moths. Okay, black cherry. The fruit is consumed by 33 bird species and mammals. It's a special value to native bees, bumblebees, honeybees, and a larval host to a whole slew of them. And this is its pollen. That's its pollen, its blooms, or its flowers, I guess. Mexican plum, larval host to several moths, special value to native bees. Flowering dogwood, larval host to a spring azure.
Do we get flowering dogwood here?
Huh?
Do we get flowering dogwood here?
We for sure do. And I had tons of them on my property up there. And so I know we do in Huntsville.
Yeah.
So
National Forest.
we get them.
or
Yeah.
Knoxville State Park.
Yeah, I had flowering dogwood and roughleaf dogwood. What I just got at, I went to the other native, not the TMN group in Livingston and gave a presentation, and I got a silky dogwood, which I've never heard of. I had never, but it's more like a bush. So, and I had this deer issue, and the deers ate it, so I ringed it, and so I think it's going to make it. Okay, Eastern redbud bud. There's also a Western redbud, which is interesting, which I didn't know until I went to. I actually did a hiking trip to the Grand Canyon, and we stayed overnight, and there were. And I didn't realize I'd apparently never been to the Grand Canyon in the spring. I didn't realize how green it is down there. And just, gosh, there were these huge flowering Western redbuds. It's like when you accidentally go to Atlanta when the azaleas are blooming, or Savannah, and happen to get there in that 2 week span. Okay, a tulip poplar. Well, I'm getting one of these. Look at that flower. And it's a host for a silk moth and an eastern tiger swallowtail.
They have a huge specimen of that in Jones Forest right next to the classroom. Yes, and every now and then little ones pop up.
Oh,
So if you're looking for one.
okay, I am. I will tell. Maybe I can talk to another one. Okay. Anybody else who wants one? You didn't hear that, right? Okay. Okay. Parsley Hawthorne. The leaves look like parsley, and then the flowers have the regular hawthorn look, and hawthorns are sometimes hard to identify. I had one on my property I never could identify, and I took it to the Forest Service, and they're going, yeah, those are hard. Okay, great. But anyway, but they have thorns typically. Honey locust, I had a lot of these at my place. And this presentation, when you get it, it'll tell you who all they're a host for. Okay, Vitex. You either hate them or you love them. I tend to love them because they are pollinator magnets. I had one planted at the end of my porch at my other house, and I would just go sit out there and drink coffee, and it's all I hear is for all of the, each spike of a flower had bees, wasps, butterflies, moths, I mean, everything.
Are those native?
They are not native. Okay, pollinators love it. So, yeah, they're on several invasives lists, but not like at the federal level, but NIPSOT hates them. NIPSOT hates them. There's another that, there's a Texas invasive group and they hate them. But this is just one from my yard taken with my son. I mean, but they're typically covered. They're also a Texas superstar. Okay, so Texas AgriLife loves them.
That was the thing I thought was strange when I found out about the crepe myrtles. So my property had crepe myrtles all over it. There still does. And then I found out, well, those aren't native. And then there was like, you know, a lot of negative talk on them. But then in the mornings, my flower blooms on my crepe myrtles are covered in bees.
Yeah.
Every morning.
And those may be honeybees. I don't know. Which are not native either. It's
So that's
typically
a bad bee.
No. It's still fine. It just depends on what you want to support. One thing that I found out, I got asked to do a presentation at the Daughters of the Confederacy or something new. And I got picked because it was about landscaping and the antebellum. And they said, oh, that's been native. Lisa, you do it. Okay. So then I looked it up. And I found out that that's when it was in the antebellum period. That's when we got crepe myrtles. And that's when we got fox shrubs. And that's when we got all these because all these Southerners didn't want to have their winky plants. And so they brought in all this stuff from China. Who knew? So I'm going, oh, well, I got the wrong girl for this one. But anyway, it was still interesting. But yeah, it just depends. It depends on what you want.
So what's the Texas Superstar?
Oh, Texas Superstar, AgriLife, Texas AgriLife has plants that do very well here.
Oh.
Yeah. Now for me, I like Vitex, and I planted 3 on the property that I got. But if I were in the Edwards Plateau, I would not plant any, because what happens is their seeds get washed off during a flash flood and they end up everywhere. I had a mimosa that was right on my creek that was there on the 100 acres that I had, and I cut it down and kept cutting it down every time because I don't have a problem with mimosas. I think they're kind of pretty, but they will go everywhere. And I didn't want, and this was Little Sulphur Creek that went into Nelson Creek, which went down to the Trinity. I had the potential for populating half the state with mimosas, and so I took it out. I've never, for my Vitex, I've never had one go anywhere other than the one I planted. So, but if I were in the Edwards Plateau, I wouldn't do it. Or somewhere where I had the potential to affect someone else. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Oh, shoot. My favorite, I got these, Possum Hall. This is an Ilex decidua. The Ilex vomitoris is the Yopon. So this is another Ilex. But this one, I love them, the bark is like this silvery gray. And then it's got these gazillion red-orange berries and the leaves fall off. So in the winter, you just have this, it's just beautiful. And then all of a sudden, I had one right outside my office. and I could see it through the window. And I'm sitting there at my desk, happened to be sitting there at my desk, and these cardinals all landed, and then, in the spring, and like 10 seconds later, every berry was gone. And I'm going, hot dog, but it was perfect because it was about to bud out. So it needed that room for all new berries, but they stayed up the whole winter. It's beautiful. I like them. Okay, Hercules Cub. I had these on the property. Actually, that was on my property. And larval host for a giant swallowtail. Sassafras, I love. This tree is great. One, it changes color in the fall, but it has 3 different leaf shapes on it. It has the regular leaf shape, it has a trident, and it has a mitten. So here's the trident. That's a mitten, I think, and there you go. And if your house caught right, that is your favorite drink. Yeah. Now I'm into shrubs. Okay, so Virginia sweetspire attracts bees, white honeysuckle, special value to bumblebees. It is really a Central Texas native, but it blooms here and it's covered in bees through the winter. I got this from one of the other master naturalists, Diana Foss. Well, she's our, what is she?
She's our advisor.
Our advisor, yeah. She's the one who said, oh, you need to put white honeysuckle in there. And I went, okay. So I haven't gotten one of these yet, but I will. This I love. This was my favorite plant, and I paid good money. I paid money for this. This one that I planted in my flower bed, and it got watered all the time, and it loved it. So I finally had to take it out because I had to trim it back to 12 feet by 12 feet, and you couldn't get up the sidewalk. No, because the little trunk thing just kept getting bigger and bigger too. Then I go walking out in the utility easement we have back there, and they're everywhere. This was kind of what I expected it to do. Get 3 feet tall, maybe. It's not what happened. So that's one thing too. If a plant really likes it where you put it, throw that how big it's going to get thing out the window, because it may just keep going. Yeah, so I'm saying, you know, and just keep getting bigger. But they're beautiful, beautiful flowers. I love this one. Esperanza or yellow bells. I had this picture up in some presentation I was doing. I said, yeah, and there's some little moth up here. And then afterward, this guy came up to me and said, that's not a moth, that's a butterfly. It's a skipper. And I went, oh, okay. Yeah. So clearly I don't know my butterflies at all, but love this one. This is one that is actually commercially available, an Esperanza. They call it, or you'll often see it as Tacoma stands, but you can get this at like Houston Garden Center. Here, mine died to the ground every winter, and it would get about this tall. I've seen them in Houston, 15 feet tall, because they don't go away. In Houston, they survive all year, typically. American beautyberry, understory, and the more water we have, the more purple berries you get. I had planted some right out on the other end of my porch from the Vitex, and I watered them, and so I had Berry City, and they're just beautiful. A rock rose, this is a Central Texas native, but it'll grow really, really well here. And it may die back, but it reseeds itself. And so it may pop up somewhere you didn't originally have it. Duranta, this is not a native, it's a native in Florida, but not here. But look at this. I mean, half the butterfly pictures that I have that I've had mounted on aluminum are on my Duranta, because it's just another pollinator magnet. Texas Lantana. Flame acanthus. I really like the flame acanthus too. One thing that and that was in my yard. One thing that happened with my flame acanthus is all the leaves fall off and it looks dead during the winter. And so I cut it down to the ground before every spring. And then it, rebloom. Well, one year I just didn't get around to it. I guess I was traveling or something. Anyway, I came back, all those things that I thought were dead, budded. And I went, oh, sorry. Sorry, I've been cutting into the ground But every single one of them did. And it was beautiful. So anyway, then I quit, cut it to the ground every year. And I ended up having to trim it back just to keep it like within 6 feet diameter. So. Button bush, you want something, you have a place that has a lot of water, button bush. Button bush is a good choice for that. Turk's cap. Maryann will talk about Turk's cap. It's a nectar source for hummingbirds. The Viburnums, I have never had any luck with Viburnums. And at this point, I think that they recognize my fear. It doesn't matter which kind I get. They don't like me. They have not made it. And but if you can grow them, then if they like you, or maybe it was just because I was putting them in all that clay. Maybe I need to try again now that I'm not there. But anyway, the Viburnums are native. All these are native, and they're host for spring azure. Okay, pipe vines and other vines. Okay, again, you want pipe vine swallowtail. You need pipe vine. Do you remember when Rhonda and Jean did the caterpillar handle? Okay, so Jean had one of our grinding buddies had a bunch of pipe vine caterpillars, and they ate every bit of pipe vine that she had. And so she called one of the other ladies in the Herb Society that she knew had pipe vine, and so then she transported all of her pipe vine caterpillars over there so that they could continue eating. Yeah, go further, and it worked. Yeah, and so they all made it. Oh. I have this little pipe vine is from Brazil, and this is it stays low to the ground. I even put up a little thing for it to climb, and it just goes, yeah, right, and it does this little ground deal. This Dutchman's pipe vine is native really to the east and northeast, but it is naturalized over like the whole eastern half of the United States. This you might be able to find, and this I'll end up putting up at some point, not this summer. So.
And Dutchman's like grow up though or something?
Yes, it would want to grow up something. Yeah. Okay, coral honeysuckle. This was in my woods, and so it's naturally occurring. A Carolina jessamine is a native vine, and it's a mainstay of the suburban landscape, and it reaches 10 to 20 feet. Okay, but then look what I found. The flowers, leaves, and roots are poisonous and are toxic or lethal to humans and livestock if consumed. I'm going, okay. The nectar is toxic to honeybees if consumed, and the honey produced from it may be toxic to humans. I'm going, okay. But you can find these anywhere. I mean, in Home Depot. Yeah, and they're all over the woods where I am right now. So, but I had just bought one when I saw that, and so I said, no, maybe I won't do that. But now I'm thinking, as long as I don't have honeybees, then, and since they're everywhere anyway, then it is, it's an okay. Yeah. Okay, one thing too, and on all these, I put can reach 50 feet, can reach 35 feet, can reach 10 feet, because each vine can only grow so far. And so if you want something to cover a pergola, don't get one that only gets 5 feet tall. So anyway, on this presentation, I put that up there. So a cross vine, trumpet vine, these I see all the time, like out in the woods. I want this, a blue jasmine. I've never seen one, but, and see, this is a small one, only 6 to 10 feet. Alamo vine can be very aggressive. It's really goes to central Texas, I guess, hence Alamo vine. This I just planted in my yard, and these are the native passion vine. You can tell if it's one way to tell a native if its leaves are 3-lobed, and 5-lobed are a Chinese variety, 5-lobed leaves. So 3 native, 5 not. This is when I discovered I had gophers. I had planted these passion vines around my fence. Then I'm watering it, and all of a sudden this hole appears and water starts going down. I went, what did I do? How did I do that? You know, and so then I put my hand goes up to here and I'm, oh no. And so I put more soil in there and then I go to the next one, it's good, and I'm going, what is this? And then I see all these things in the backyard. They look like little, not tunnels because it's above ground, you know, but little dirt humps going on. And I'm going, what is this? So texted my gardening buddy and said, do we have gophers here? And she said, oh yeah. Oh, great.
Gophers or moles?
Is it mold?
Could be moles.
I have no idea. Or
Moles
mold.
are vegetarian.
Well, whatever. They're, so anyway, she said, oh yeah, we've got gophers and you can put out bait. And I went, I like to kill them. I'm a complete vegetarian because I don't want to kill anything. You know? But anyway, what it brought to mind was a long time ago, I had bought these wire things that I thought were to put over plants, but it turns out they're to put a plant in when you have gophers, because then you plant the whole thing in there and then they can't get to the roots to eat the roots, which I guess is why they're going after them. Right now, most of them are still alive, so I'll do something different at some point, but not right now when it's 110.
Lisa, did you put that passion vine in a lot of sun, in a really sunny area?
Yep.
You did?
It gets, yes, it gets a lot of sun. I'm having to water the crud out of it. Well, I'm having to water right now, water everything. Okay, perennials, this is a giant coneflower. And even though it says coneflower, it's not an echinacea. It's really a giant black-eyed Susan because it's a Rudbeckia. And I love these. So here was that coral bean over here on the other side of my little sidewalk. And then these were these. And then purple coneflowers. These are echinaceas. That wasn't my yard. This was somebody else's yard. That was my yard. Greg's blue mist flower or blue mist flower. See, this is another deal. These are not moths. These are butterflies. Oh, these are butterflies.
So,
They're skippers.
do you have any of that in the blue mist flower? Does anyone have that in your? I mean, mine this year, are yours rare this year? Mine haven't got above a foot high. Yeah, mine is really low. And they're wilted. Something's
more
going on
water.
with the mist flower.
They need a lot more water.
They need more water. Yeah, I had planted some in my poor thing, and at this point, really, I'm just trying to keep the big stuff alive. I'm gonna have to let all the other stuff go. Mealy blue sage, lance sleep coreopsis or chickseed, black-eyed Susan, another Rudbeckia. So that other coneflower was just a giant Rudbeckia. Blackfoot daisy, I've never had good luck with these. And then somebody told me, oh yeah, they're a fall bloomer. And I'm going, oh, no wonder they're just shriveling up and dying in the summer. Okay. I'm planting them the wrong time of year. Mexican hat, I've had really good luck with these. Really good luck with Mexican hat in full sun. Heartleaf skullcap. This is in the kind of like mint. It'll spread, but I just love this. I love it. And it's a nectar source for everybody. Love heartleaf skullcap. This was my bluebonnet bed. So all of us had to get around it. These are some ladies I graduated from high school with. This aromatic aster I've never had and I want because I just think they're beautiful. Gulf Coast penstemon, these do great here and they go everywhere. So if you have an area that you want to just have something that really spreads and is the native, try Gulf Coast penstemon. Yellow columbine, I needed a shadier place for this. But it survived in the sun because I watered it, but it wasn't happy. See, these are water lovers. So don't plant your Texas spider lily next to something that wants dry feet. This would live literally in the water. It can take some water. American water willow, this is what they're planting through the Friends of Lake Livingston project in order to introduce natives into Lake Livingston. So some like water and some don't. Plant accordingly. swamp sunflower. I put some of these at the edge of the pond where I am now, not realizing that during a drought, my pond is gonna go down a foot and a half. And so they're at the edge now. I'm gonna move them somewhere else just because I want them to survive, and they're not gonna survive if I leave them. And also some fall obedient plants. I planted both of these down around my pond, and it's not looking good.
Deer resistant.
Yes. Clovers, I just put all of these on one page because they're all special value to native bees, bumblebees, and honeybees. These are my favorite books. Native plant, Texas Plants Landscaping, region by region, by its husband and wife team, the Wasowskis. I think both of them are dead now. Bringing Nature Home by Doug Tallamy, Nature's Best Hope by Doug Tallamy, Howard Garrett, Texas Wildscapes, Gardening and Wildlife, and Southern Herb Growing by Madeline Hill. If you want to start growing some herbs, that's a really good one. I found several copies on thrift books. It's out print. Okay, so wrap it up. So pollinators evolved with the natives, as did other insects. They need nectar plants and may need host plants. Choose the plant to suit your purpose. You may not have native soil, but you can still plant native. Pollinators and other wildlife will thank you. Some plants, including natives, need lots of sun, some don't. Plant accordingly. Like the American beautyberry, that's an understory plant. It's not going to do well if you put it in full sun. So plant accordingly. Some plants, including natives, need lots of water and some don't. Plant accordingly. Ensure the pollinator and the plant is native to your area. Don't plant something for a butterfly and that's it. Any questions? Yeah.
What was that plant on that last slide previous to this? What is that, the pink?
The sensitive,
Just a minute.
sensitive plant, no,
After that.
the last one.
Oh, the
Again,
fall
the last
obedient plant.
No, go again. Go to the last one.
Oh, the last one.
Yeah.
This.
No, one more. There we go.
Oh.
The
Oh, I
sensitive
love
plant.
this. Sorry. Yeah, this was on my property, and it's in the mimosa family, but it's a ground cover.
And I grew up with that. I called it sleeping grass.
Yeah. I love this.
I love it, but I don't know what it is. It's prickly.
I knew it.
They call it sensitive plant.
What is it?
They call it a sensitive plant.
I don't remember.
Sensitive.
Sensitive plant.
Sensitive.
But I looked it up at one point, so that's how I know it is in the mimosa family.
Sensitive.
But it's a native,
Yeah, I mean.
and
I've
now
seen it all my life.
all I can remember. But
Bees love it.
bees love it, and it's just beautiful. It's just beautiful, and it's a ground. Now it has little thorns, or not even little thorns, much these little stickers all the way down things. So it, wasn't much fun when I tried to dig some up, but I persevered because I mean it was. I love these. Yeah. But I mean, even their little blooms look like similar to a mimosa tree.
And the leaves.
Yeah, and the leaves too. But this is just totally native, and it was just beautiful where I found it from. Full sun. Full sun. It was in full sun. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank y'all. So let's take another 10-minute break. 10-minute break, and then we're gonna start.
Yeah, I got to think about that.
Our presentation, which is great. Yes, yes.
I just have that.
You know what, I'm gonna let her do this. How do you want to do these? What'd you bring? Yeah, I thought that, I mean, like, effort and thinking. Yeah.
And we're not done yet.
Still 9 bananas left to eat.
I ate
Get
one,
to
and
it.
it was really big.
They're just a
No,
little
it's pretty
green.
big. It was really big. So, there's sometimes when I read it.
I had one.
I'll be eating banana cake.
Yes, exactly.
It is quite. Great reading. I'm done. Yeah.
You are so.
It's the only time that I've ever sat in the front row of a class. That's the time I've ever been ahead reading. Yeah. Go right ahead.
Yes, fine. Any response?
Was it the Siri Rex?
X and S.
Yeah.
They did not. It's supposed to show off the audio. Here is it's sound.
Hey, someone in chat said there's a nice piece of acreage, 1,200 acres for sale. Where YourTranquilityRanch.com. Because I have nothing to gain, I just don't want to see it develop.
Where is it?
She said, I don't know, it says, YourTranquilityRanch.com. Yes,
Because of what to see.
How much is resource? How much is it gonna cost?
Yeah. 1 mile north of 149.
Oh, wow.
That would be expensive.
Boy, that is valuable property.
Yeah, that does sound awful close, doesn't it?
Yeah.
1488, it's so busy, it's hard to believe. We're on the stars planet system, 5 years ago.
Not a speedway anymore, it's a stoplight every.
That kind of property, that I would take something like Conservancy or somebody,
Yeah, but you know what bothers me is, okay, it used to be a 2-lane road, right?
Yeah.
You now have a nice 5-lane road with a center turn lane the whole way, and they all drive on that lane nice and slow. You're going slower than when it's the other way.
Yeah, I may have to move to Madison pretty soon. Anybody coming to see the bats tonight or?
Yeah, I told Carol that that's sure she announced this.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, there's a lot of people, I think 42 people should
Here we go. Internet started. Will you give that to Lisa?
So it's two where it's not. These two.
It's native.
Punching, just. Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. I just know.
Well, it's funny, 'cause right after that,
That little thing, I was gonna say.
She's the one that does the one.
He's gone. I just found out how to do that today. That's crazy, right? And you've got the remote.
Yeah, okay, great.
So that's great. If it ever has a problem clicking, I just need to come over and click once and then it'll start clicking.
So where are you reviewing?
That's the camera.
And it picks up and you walk around.
And then when you kind of think about it.
Okay, see right here, where you're talking, now when you're talking and you walk around, it'll follow you around and. Hey, Alan, I'm over here now. Oh, is it following you?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So, and it also does a 360 of the room, so people at home who are watching us. Yeah. Are getting all of that. Now, when I record it, it's recording this, and then it's not recording you in the
Wandering around.
you're wandering around. It's just recording your voice.
Okay.
And the slideshow. So this is just.
So then where do you know this? then?
What I do is we have our own. Because I usually start recording when I first get in. I have like an hour, I have to edit on the.
You can only do so much. But I.
And then I'll put it out. So it may take me. Yeah, I think it's on YouTube, and then I send it to Lisa, and she sends it out. So this is. And then send through all these they like chapters.
I was gonna ask, do you know what it
Okay, so y'all ready? Okay, I'm thrilled to introduce y'all to Maryann Readal. I met Maryann through the Native, sorry, not the next one, the Herb Society of America Texas Time Unit. When I first went, I said, okay, y'all totally did that because we're in Huntsville with all the prisons, right? And they said, oh, no. And then they fessed up that, yeah, we thought about the doing time unit. No. Okay. But anyway, it's the Texas Time Unit. And I love it. Anyway, Maryann is a retired library director of Lone Star College, North Harris. She serves on the board of the Herb Society of America at the national level. She's a member of the Herb Society's Texas Time Unit and the Walker County Master Gardeners in Huntsville. She does herb training for several Master Gardener intern programs, and a great job on that. They do this hands-on thing, and it's really, really great. We've been doing video thing for the last couple of years, since COVID, and it's really nice. Okay, she gives presentations about herbs and gardening for a number of community organizations. She writes at the national level for the Herb Society's Notable Native program, and also writes a blog article about a different herb every month. Again, at the national level, that goes out to all of us. She's written about native plants for her community's newsletter and has been an avid gardener for as long as she can remember.
Well, thank you, Lisa, very much. And I'm very happy to be here to communicate to you about my passion about herbs, and especially these herbs I'm going to be talking about are they're all native plants. And it was very hard to winnow down just a few native plants because Texas has over 5,000-6,000 native plant species. And I was to choose those that were herbs. There are a lot of them are herbs, but I couldn't do all of them. I just had to do a few of them. So anyway, I want to start off with this picture first because of all places, I found this garden in Cleveland, Ohio. And these are all native herbs here that grow here in Texas. First, we have the Texas Lantana, and then we have the goldenrod, and then we have the purple top vervain. And look how beautiful that is. Who would not want that in their yard? Beautiful, beautiful garden. Okay, so this is not,
You just have to give it one click and then it should work the rest of the time.
okay, all right. Okay, so what is the Herb Society of America? Well, first of all, there's our it's easy to remember, our website, herbsociety.org. We are a national organization, and we have groups all over the United States that we study herbs and we study native plants as well. And we have a couple of native plant programs in our Herb Society. One of them is called the Notable Native Program, where every year we choose a native plant, or just like a perennial plant usually, and then a native herb and tree. And we study that, and we put together like a profile of that herb, and we mount it on our website. So we have, for 10 years, we have been doing that. And so these profiles of these different native herbs are on our website, free for anybody to use or download, whatever you want. Very well-researched profiles for these native herbs. And then we have a Green Bridges program, which is a program whereby you can apply to have your garden certified as a Green Bridges garden. And all you do is you fill out the application and you list some of the native plants that you have in your yard. I mean, this is a program that's focused on native plants. And if they're native herbs, that's all the better. But that's all you have to do, and then send that into our organization. And then for $10, you can get this beautiful sign to put on in your garden. And that's your certification that you have a Green Bridges garden. And we have about 200 of these gardens throughout the United States. Recently, we have started a program where we are trying to monitor the native bee counts in our own yards. So this is the second year that we've done it. And we're trying to track whether or not these native bees, the populations are decreasing or increasing. And so that's another program that we have started. Now, my group, the Texas Time Unit, is in Huntsville, like Lisa said. And we study the herbs, and we do have an herb garden at the back of the Wynn home. If you're familiar with Huntsville, if you've gone into Huntsville at all, before you get to the downtown area, there's a big white house on the left, and that's the Wynn home. It's a big historic home. And we maintain an herb garden in the back of that home. And and I find every year we're including more and more native herbs in that garden and we, of course, we have all of the traditional herbs in that garden, but we're starting to incorporate more of those native herbs. And every year we have all of the third graders in Huntsville come to our garden and they tour our garden. And we talk about the herbs, we tell them stories about the herbs, and they love it. So that's one of the things we do. We have a great plant sale in March. It's always the last Saturday in March, and we do have native plants in that sale. And as you know, that's been a topic that I've been hearing, that it's very difficult to find native plants to buy, or you just don't find them in the nurseries. A lot of them are pass-along plants, and you know that people just grew them in their yards and they shared them with each other. Well, that's what we do. We're all of us, most of us in our group are really avid plants people, and we're always on the lookout for something different. So we're plant collectors. And what we do in the spring is we plant the seeds, we do the cuttings, we do the root divisions, and then we pot them up and we sell them at our plant sale. So if you're interested in herbs and native plants, pass-along plants, perennials, annuals, we have a lot of that stuff. So think about that, the last Saturday in March. Okay, so what is an herb anyway? Because I am going to talk about native plants that are herbs. So we have a very broad definition of herbs in the Herb Society, and it is any plant that can be used for food, medicine, or decoration. And by decoration, I mean a craft decoration. It could be a cosmetic, a perfume, building something, anything like that. Herbs have a very long history of medicinal use because, you know, before the 19th century, that's all people had for medicine. They had plants. They had to find, they discovered the use of plants were valuable as medicine. So they have a very long history. And traditional people still in this world still use plants as medicine. It's estimated that about 70 to 80% of African people still depend on plants for their medicine. 50% of Europeans do, and 30% here in the United States do. So and people are becoming more and more interested in the native plants and using them for health benefits. So the purpose of this presentation is just to get you acquainted with some of the unusual uses of some of our native plants. And hopefully will help you to look at those plants differently and to have a deeper appreciation for our native plants. I know all of us do already, but you know, sometimes we have to protect them. I mean, I know in my neighborhood, we're trying to protect the native plants, and we have to have a good reason why we want to protect them. And there are a lot of good reasons to protect them. So I hope that this presentation will give you some more reasons why we want to value these plants. I am going to cover the plants and the trees and some of the shrubs, and some of them Lisa has already mentioned as well. So you'll hear about them again. I have to tell you about our medicinal disclaimer for our Herb Society, because I am talking about the medicinal aspects of some of these plants. It's for educational purposes only, and I'm not endorsing any particular herb for a medical treatment. And any herbalist will tell you that if you want to use herbs to treat an ailment that you might have, you need to check with your doctor first, or whoever your healthcare provider is, because some of the herbs are powerful and they can interact with any medication that you're taking. So do check with a healthcare provider. Okay, so the first one I'm going to talk about is agave. A native plant for us, and it's called the century plant. It gets that tall flower stalk that looks like a candelabra. Those flowers are pollinator. The pollinators love the flowers. After that, and the birds love the seeds. After that plant flowers, the plant dies. But fortunately, there are pups that are coming up alongside of it, and they form another plant. Now, the thorn on the tip of that plant is a very sharp. You can pull that tip. It's like a needle. You can pull it, and it'll pull along some of the fiber, and it's like a thread. Well, Native Americans used that as a needle and thread, and they would use it to sew their clothing with that needle. The leaves have been used for shingles, for houses. The fibers in the leaves have been used to make mats, ropes, baskets, cloth, and even paper. Now, the plant has saponins. Saponins are an ingredient in a plant that makes soap. And if you would take something, you would take the leaf and rub it, with water, it would make soap, and you could clean things with it. So that plant was used for soap at one time. Cortisone and steroids have been derived from the saponins in this plant. The sap from the leaves have been used to treat cuts and burns and other skin irritations, and it was also used as a stomach tonic. The roots were used to treat arthritis and joint pain, and also jaundice. It was also used as a diuretic and to treat syphilis. Now, we know that the sap of that plant, we know what we get from that, and that's tequila. So yeah, so we use that. You can use that as a medicine too, I guess. And you can also get make syrup out of that sap. And you can buy that in the grocery store, wherever you buy your sugar, that's where the agave syrup is. The Apaches used the agave for food, drink, and fiber, and it was also used in religious rites. And you'll find that it's really interesting that the Native Americans knew how to use these plants. And when the colonists came over, they brought some of their own medicinal plants with them, but they also learned from the Native Americans that were here, some of the plants, the native plants that could be used to treat some of the ailments that they had when they got here. So they were a resource people for the colonists. Now, cattail, this one is called the supermarket of the swamp, because every single part of that plant can be used for something. It's a perennial plant, and the rhizomes in the fall and in the winter can be used. They can be roasted and boiled, and they can be eaten. The Iroquois macerated those rhizomes, and they boiled them, and they used them as a sweetening syrup. And the rhizomes were also, you can pound them and you can make a flour out of them. The young shoots of the plant can be eaten in the spring, and it has as much protein as rice and corn and more carbohydrates than potatoes. So a very good source of food. Now the cattail heads, before they open, can be boiled and eaten like corn on the cob. And when it blooms, it gets that yellow pollen all over it. That yellow pollen is edible. And the seeds, also the seeds can be ground and used as flour also. The Native Americans used the pollen as part of their ceremonies. They used it as body paint whenever they had their ceremonies. And the floss, when it dries, the floss inside of that cattail head, it was used during World War II as the filler for life vests, because kapok was in short supply during World War II. So that's what they used for the life vests for the soldiers. Now the leaves have been used for thatch, sleeping mats. They've used for shoes and to make baskets. Whoops, let me go back. And then it's also a medicinal plant. It's used to treat wounds and burns. And Dioscorides was a Greek physician way back when, and he was a very early Greek physician, and he combined the floss of the plant with grease, and he used it to treat burns and other skin conditions. It's a great plant for our ecosystem because it filters out the impurities in the water, and it's also a habitat for birds and animals. So this is just a wonderful plant to have. And chickweed, you probably all have seen this in your yard, in your grass. Well, this winter, and you usually see it in the winter and in the springtime, it's a slow growing ground cover, and it's a very nutritious plant. The leaves are edible, and you can use it, you can cook it just like spinach. You can add it to smoothies. It contains a lot of iron, vitamins, and minerals, so it's a good for you kind of herb. It is also a medicinal herb, and they found that eating it has a high vitamin C content, and so they used it to treat scurvy, which was caused by a lack of vitamin C. And also the cooked greens were used as a poultice for wounds and for bruises. And even today, herbalists today still use this plant to treat urinary tract pain, gastrointestinal issues, and also skin inflammation. So it's still one that is used today for medicine. This one, you all probably have known about this one, the chiltepin or chili piquin pepper, also called bird pepper, but it's an annual or a short-lived perennial. And this plant has the little white flowers that turn into these little red peppers that are very, very hot. And it's called the ancestor of all peppers. Archaeologists have found evidence of this plant back 7,200 years in Mexico. So it's known as the oldest spice known to humans. It's very, very hot. You can crush it and put it in soups and stews. You can soak it in vinegar and you'll have a hot sauce from it. And there was an old Texas remedy that was if you had a sore throat, you would swallow the berries, or if you had a cough, you would use these berries. I think it would make you cough more, but but there is current research that shows that chili peppers raise metabolism rate, aids digestion, reduces cholesterol, and prevents heart attacks. So it's also an effective pain reliever. You'll see that about a lot of hot peppers, that if they are used, capsaicin is the hot ingredient in peppers, and that's what they use to treat arthritis. And the Texas state legislature named this the state pepper in 1997. Yes.
Do you know, with this, but we just planted one of these for the first time this year. So is it gonna come back?
It can, but it can come back, but I think it'll probably reseed itself if it likes where it is.
So wherever it's at, once it dies down, maybe next year, then I'll see babies or something.
Babies, yeah. But but I wouldn't cut it back until maybe in the spring.
Okay.
But if it does come back, it's not going to come back every year, because it is a short-lived perennial. And Lisa talked about this one, the coneflower. And this is an example of one. The one that we see on the edges of the woods, it's Echinacea augustifolia. This one is purpurea. But the augustifolia is one that has been over harvested, because this was one that was, this is a plant that's really a well-known medicinal plant. And so it has been over harvested. Let me see. And then again, the Native Americans used the roots of this plant as a local anesthetic, and they used it to ease toothaches, sore throats, and coughs. And the bristly centers of the plant were used as cones. Early American herbal doctors used the plant to treat blood poisoning, and how they figured that out, I can't imagine, but somehow they did. They used it to treat sores and ulcers, meningitis, and other inflammations. 50,000 pounds of the root of this plant was exported to Europe in the early 1900s for medicinal reasons, I'm sure. And it kind of went out of fashion here in the United States, but that in the 1970s with the Back to Nature movement, it became and it still is one of the best-selling herbs in the United States. Controversy still rages about whether or not this plant is effective as a medicinal plant. Some say it is, and some say it has a lot of immunostimulating properties and that it has antibiotic properties. And some say, well, they just don't see the evidence that there is. But we still see echinacea products over the counter in our drugstores. I think a lot of it is what you believe in too. And this one is frostweed, and I love this plant. It's starting to bloom right now in my yard, and it gets pretty tall. It's about 9 foot tall in my yard. It's also called the ice plant, and the reason it's called the ice plant is that in the wintertime when we have a sudden freeze, the sap is still flowing in that plant, and we have a sudden freeze, and the air is cold, and it causes the stem to break and release the sap, and the sap just freezes, and it'll form all kinds of different formations of ice. And I was so jealous because a friend of mine in Dallas had this plant, and every year she would post pictures of this plant and all the ice formations on it. And I was so jealous because I could never find this plant in the nurseries. You could never find it. I don't know how I found it. I think I maybe got it at Nature's Way. But I finally did get it and planted it in my yard. And lo and behold, last year I had a little ice crystal there. It's a little one, but I still had it. So I'm anxious to watch this one every winter to see what I get. But this is it's a beautiful plant because it gets these beautiful white flowers. They're big clusters of flowers, and the pollen and the bees, all kinds of bees and wasps are just all over that thing. Now, the Native Americans used this plant, they used the leaves and the flowers, and they used it as a diuretic, a wound cleaner, and they used it to treat fevers and chills. It was also called squawweed because it was used for women's issues, and it was an abortifacient, and it controlled bleeding after birth. In Texas folk medicine, the roots were used for tea and mixed with whiskey and used as a blood thinner. And also Native Americans used the leaves as a tobacco. And as I mentioned, it is a good pollinator plant. And this is one that it has never, the leaves haven't drooped with this hot weather and dry weather. It just keeps going. So it's a good one for our hot summers and doesn't need a whole lot of water. A nice plant to have. And goldenrod, we all know goldenrod. Unfortunately, it's one that has had a bad rap throughout the years because a lot of people think that it causes allergies, but it does not. Because the pollen is just too big for it to cause allergies. It's always the ragweed that blooms at the same time as goldenrod that causes the allergy problems. Now, tea, you can make a tea from those leaves. You can just dry those leaves and make a tea from them. Now, after the British tea was dumped into Boston Harbor, which started the Revolutionary War, the colonists, they depended on tea. They needed to find another source of tea. So they started using goldenrod as tea. And then another name for it was Liberty tea. There were several other plants that they also used as to substitute for the British tea. Now, goldenrod tea was exported to China in the 1700s. Who would think that China would need tea? But they exported this stuff. And there are some interesting folk beliefs that are associated with goldenrod. One is that where it blooms, there's a buried treasure. And another one is if it's blooming in your yard or you have it in your yard and you didn't plant it, good fortune is going to follow you. It was also used at one time as a divining rod to find water. And it's been used as a medicinal herb since ancient times. And solidago is really a Greek word, and it means to make whole. So it was used to stop bleeding. And large cargoes of goldenrod were also shipped to England at one time to the apothecary shops because they were using it in England as a medicinal herb. Native Americans used it to treat ulcers and boils, rheumatism, pain and nausea, all sorts of things. And they chewed the leaves also to relieve toothaches and sore throat. They also called it the sun medicine because they would use it in their medicinal steam baths. And today, modern herbalists still use this plant for different reasons. For sinus infections, diuretics, they reduce flatulence, to promote sweating. So that it is still used today as a medicinal herb. It's also a dye plant. And the oil extracted from the leaves is used in perfumes. And this is an interesting thing too. Thomas Edison extracted the latex from this plant to make rubber. And he managed to convince Henry Ford to make some tires out of the latex from this plant for his cars. And Henry Ford actually did have a Model T with tires made out of the rubber from this plant. I thought that was very interesting. I don't know how many goldenrods you'd have to cut down in order to make 4 tires, but he did it. But they did it. You probably all have seen this one, Jimson weed, also called angel's trumpet and devil's trumpet, because if you eat it, you're either going to go to hell or you're going to go to heaven. Either one. It's a very poisonous plant. It causes hallucinations. If you eat too much of it, you may not recover from that hallucination. And the Poison Control Center always has there are always some young people who try to use this plant to create a cheap high. And the Poison Control Center has to deal with that and the emergency room. Now, this was a sacred plant to the Native Americans because they used it in their religious ceremonies because, they had visions, and that's how they got their visions, by eating this plant. It was also called Jamestown weed because In 1675, a group of British soldiers thought it was a pot herb and they put it in their stew, in their soup or their stew or whatever it was. And it took them 11 days to get over that soup that they ate. And they couldn't remember a thing after that, but they couldn't remember anything that happened during that 11 days. So it really is one to be careful with. Texas cowboys smoked the leaves to relieve asthma because the plant contains scopolamine. And that scopolamine, when you breathe it in, it would deaden the nerve endings in the lungs, so it helped them to breathe better. 19th century doctors used it for pain, and during both world wars, doctors used it when atropine from belladonna was in short supply, and they needed to do field surgery. And in the field hospitals, they used this. They used from this plant. They used as an anesthetic to do those surgeries. We talked about passion vine again, another Paciflora. Perennial vine, vigorous grower. It has an orange fruit that pops when you squeeze it. So often it's called the May pop. And it's used in jams and jellies. If you could take that. Stop the bars off. Okay, so the Native Americans used the stems, the leaves, and roots as a sedative. Oh. And the host plant, it is a host plant for the Gulf fritillary butterfly. Okay. Oh, good, thank you. That'll disappear. Thank you very much. It is a host plant for the Gulf fritillary butterfly. And if you have, and you can see one there on the corner in the left hand, you can see the little caterpillar. So the butterfly lays its eggs on there, and then that egg hatches and it eats the leaves. And then it forms the caterpillar will form its cocoon, and oftentimes it'll hang right on the plant. And then you can watch that cocoon, the new generation of butterflies hatch from that cocoon. So it's really neat to watch that whole thing happen.
Do you know what month that happens?
You know, I think it happens all year. I think it happens all summer long because I see them. They're always on my plant. So I think it's happening. It happens all the time. Now, the other interesting thing about this plant is that it tells a story of the crucifixion or the passion of Christ. The 10 petals represent the disciples of Jesus without Peter, and without Judas and Peter. And then the 5 stamens represent the wounds Jesus received, and the 3 stigmas, the nails that he received. And then the kind of the stringy things that represent the crown of thorns. Each flower lasts 1 day and opens at noon. And this was the monks used to tell when they were trying to spread Christianity, that this was one of the stories that they would tell about this plant. And pokeweed. This is one that's now blooming in my garden, and the berries are starting to form, not quite purple yet, but it is a perennial, and it does easily reseed. I always pull it out because it just gets too big by the end of the summer. The entire plant is poisonous, especially the berries. It's not poisonous to birds, but it is poisonous for humans. But the young spring leaves, you can eat them, but they have to be boiled twice. You pick the leaves and boil them once, throw that water out, put new water in and boil it again, and it's called poke salad. Now, if none of you can remember Elvis Presley in the 1950s, he had a song called Poke Salad Annie that was very popular. And in fact, you can buy this plant, the leaves canned as poke salad. I think I saw it in Alabama once at the grocery store. So some people still eat it. So those spring leaves, they're a good source of protein and fat and carbohydrates. And that's why somehow they figured out that they were good to eat. The Native Americans used it, of course, as medicine. They used it as food. They used it as dye. They used the berries as jewelry. The Europeans took this plant back to Europe and they started using the berries to color their wine. Well, they soon found out the hard way that it was not a good idea, so they stopped doing that. Now, we had a president, our 11th president of the United States, James K. Polk. His supporters thought that poke and polk sounded the same, so his supporters would wear a sprig of this plant on their clothes to show that they supported him. Now, during the Civil War, the soldiers would use the juice from the berries to write letters home to their families. And it was once thought that the Declaration of Independence was written with the juice from these berries. But since they have done chemical analysis on that, they found that no, it wasn't the pokeberry, it was the oak gall that they used, the juice from the oak gall that was used to write the Declaration of Independence. However, the juice of this berry was used to create one of the early California state flags. So the root of this plant has potent antiviral proteins that block the replication of viruses such as flu, herpes, HIV, and polio. And they are looking at this plant in relation and how it could help treat COVID. So a lot of these plants are still being investigated and tested today for their use as medicine. Another good reason why we need to protect them, because we don't know what kind of a treasure some of these may have. And in all the research that I do about native plant or particularly herbs, I find that it's like the Indians and the South Americans, those are the people that are really doing the most research on the medicinal properties of these native plants. And so let's see, so that is a potential source of some medicine that it might be useful to us down the road. And we've talked about Turk's cap, which is a native perennial plant with that unique bloom that looks like a turban. It's in the same family as cotton, okra, and hibiscus. And this is a plant that likes, it prefers a little bit of shade and likes moist soil. The flowers, the leaves, and the fruit are full of vitamins and minerals, and they're edible. A jelly can be made from the fruit. Now the fruit, if you've ever seen it, gets a little red fruit. It's very good. It tastes like a little bit like an apple. Very tasty. So you can make a jelly out of those, and you can make a tea out of those, either the fresh flowers or the dry flowers. And the leaves and the flowers also produce a dye. So they can be used as a dye to get it like a tannish, mauvish color. In Mexico, the decoction of the flowers is used to treat diarrhea and other digestive tract problems. It's also used to treat menstrual cramps. Birds and animals like the fruits. Hummingbirds like the nectar. In fact, you can pull out the flower from the sepal and you can suck on that nectar. It's very sweet. The deer like the whole plant. So, so it's really a dessert to them. So if you have deer in your yard, this is one you would have to protect. And there is a white and a pink variety that's available of this Turk's cap. So now we're going to talk about some trees and some shrubs. And the first one is the redbud. Okay, so did you know those beautiful flowers that line the branches in the spring? Did you know that you can eat those? It's a very very tasty flower to eat. You can use them in salads, put them in bread, put them in your pancakes in the morning. You can pickle them or you can fry them. The young seed pods are also edible, but the mature ones are not, and the mature ones are still hanging on the trees. The flowers are high in vitamin C, so there's a good medicinal plant. Native Americans used strips from the bark they used it to make baskets, and they used the wood to make bows. And the early folk healers used it to treat leukemia. It's a good landscape plant because it's got those beautiful flowers in the spring and then the nice fall color. Now this one, the fringe tree, and I swear I'm seeing more and more of these trees being planted in people's yards every year. It seems like this is one that people have discovered lately. It's also called Grancy Graybeard, and the flowers are green white to plain white. And the male flower is the one that's more colorful. I mean, not colorful, but it's really a pure startling white. And which is different because usually it's the female flower that's usually prettier than the male flower. But in this case, the male flower is prettier. But the female tree is the one that gets the blue-black berries that the birds like. Now they say that this tree is tougher than a dogwood, longer lived than a cherry, and more dependable than a magnolia. And it gets those yellow leaves in the fall, which make it a nice landscape plant. The Native Americans, of course, use the roots and the bark to treat all kinds of inflammations, and they use the bark also to treat sores and wounds. And here's our majestic pine tree. The panicle has 3 needles, both male pollen and the female seed cones are both on the same tree. And it's a great tree for our birds and our wildlife. I'm always watching these birds fly in and out of these trees. Now, the resin from the tree has been used as glue. And it's a fast growing tree, so it's used as a timber tree, and it's used for plywood and for make packing paper and newsprint. Rosin and turpentine come from the resin of this tree. You know, rosin was used to caulk ships long ago. It was also, and today it's used in adhesives, surface coatings, chewing gum, soaps, and detergents. And rosin is that white powdery stuff that baseball players use on their balls to make the ball less slippery. And gymnasts use it on their hands to make their hands less slippery when they're on their equipment. And also violinists use that rosin on their violin string, on their bows. You can get a gray dye from the needles, and seeds were taken from this tree, and they were put on the Apollo 14 space flight. And it went they went on the space flight, came back, and then the seeds were planted in various locations around the United States and around the world as well. And they were called moon trees. And there's one planted at the Johnson Space Center. So there you have it, though, a tree that went to the moon. And sumac, this is more of a shrub because it gets, forms a colony of branches that come up from the root. And you'll see it on the side of the roads, and now we're starting to see the berries turn. And it's a fruit that's eaten by the animals and birds, and it is a host plant for the red-banded hair-streaked butterfly. Now the red fruit makes a lemonade. You can make a lemonade out of that red fruit, and it's called sumacade. There's malic acid in those red berries, and that's what gives it the lemony taste. The berries can be ground up, and they're used as a spice. If you've heard of the spice za'atar, it's a spice used in Middle Eastern cooking. Well, that comes from the sumac. The berries can also be used as a candy, a sweet sour candy, not sweet, but sour tart candy. It has a lot of tannic acid in those leaves, and it can be used to tan leather and hides. Native Americans and early pioneers did use it to treat colds and coughs and stomach aches. And here's yaupon, and we touched a little bit about yaupons. Now, I don't know, this is invasive in my yard. I have it coming up everywhere, but I love it because in the wintertime it gets those beautiful berries, and it just brightens up the landscape a whole lot. And of course, the birds just love the berries. The berries are poisonous for humans, though. This is the only native plant that contains caffeine. So you can make a tea out of these leaves, a caffeinated tea out of these leaves. And there are a couple of companies that have discovered this plant, and they are drying those leaves, roasting those leaves, and and packaging them and selling them in the grocery stores. And this, the Native Americans called this tree the purifier, and this is why. Because some of the tribes had a purity ritual where they would fast, and this was for men, I believe. They would fast, and then after fasting, they would drink a whole copious amounts of this tea, boiling tea. So much so that it would make them throw up. And that's why they called it Ilex vomitoria. That's how it got its name. Now, the thing about this plant, this ritual, was that there was no woman could witness this ritual. And if a woman happened to walk by when they were boiling these leaves, they had to throw out all of that water, that tea water, and start all over again. So a woman was not allowed to be anywhere near around it. It was called the black drink because it turned black after a lot of boiling. So those are the native herbs that I've chosen to tell you about. And this is another one it's Monarda fistulosa. And it is a native herb and also a medicinal herb and also a tea herb. And you can see that it's a wonderful, wonderful plant for pollinators. There is a red variety that's also a native called Monarda didyma. It's the red one. And that was another one that you could, the colonists used as a tea to substitute for the British tea that was dumped into the harbor. And that particular one you can make jams and jellies out of. Now, I wanted to share with you some of my favorite books about Texas plants. And one of them is this one by Elizabeth Silverthorne, Legends and Lore of Texas Wildflowers. There are, we've got some neat plants in this state. And she really digs out the stories about some of these plants, and there are a lot of them. And this is another one. This is a great one, Remarkable Plants of Texas, Uncommon Accounts of Our Common Natives by Matt Turner. Another one with some great stories. So we're fortunate to live in this area because not only do we have a lot of influence from Mexico and from the south of us, and we have all of those traditions about plants, and they valued plants a lot in Mexico and still do today. So we have all of that rich heritage here in our state. So, any questions? I hope you have some of these you can find and plant in your yards because there really are a lot of new plants. Well, thank you very much.
Maryann brought some door prizes. Brought 2 door prizes, so we have to draw them. We have to draw one. I guess we have to draw one. Thank you, Maryann. Number 8 is Jeff Hodges. Jeff, you get a tree.
Okay, that's
Turk's cap.
it's a Turk's cap. It's a pink Turk's cap.
It's a pink one.
I'll get water or something.
And number
Thank you.
6, put it in the shade. Kristen.
Bumblebees.
Kristen, yeah. There you go.
Oh, good.
So let me tell you, in case you haven't